Well, Sarah Vicker Willis and Scott Vicker Willis for providing some ideas, information and stories used in this book. Chapter 1. It's only half an hour since someone, Robin I think, said we should write everything down, and it's only 29 minutes since I got chosen. And for those 29 minutes I've had everyone crowded around me, gazing at the blank page and yelling ideas and advice. Rack off, guys! I'll never get this done. I haven't got a clue where to start and I can't concentrate with all this noise. Okay, that's better. I've told them to give me some peace, and Homer backed me up, so at last they've gone and I can think straight. I don't know if I'll be able to do this. I might as well say so now. I know why they chose me, because I'm meant to be the best writer. But there's a bit more to it than just being able to write. There's a few little things that can get in the way. Little things like feelings, emotions. Well, we'll come to that later. Maybe. We'll have to wait and see. I'm down at the creek now, sitting on a fallen tree. Nice tree. Not an old, rotten one that's been eaten by witchetty grubs, but a young one with a smooth, reddish trunk and the leaves still showing some green. It's hard to tell why it fell. It looks so healthy. But maybe it grew too close to the creek. It's good here. This pool's only about 10 meters by 3, but it's surprisingly deep, up to your waist in the middle. There's constant little concentric ripples from insects touching it as they skim across the surface. I wonder where they sleep, and when. I wonder if they close their eyes when they sleep. I wonder what their names are. Busy, anonymous, sleepless insects. To be honest, I'm only writing about the pool to avoid doing what I'm meant to be doing. That's like Chris, finding ways to avoid doing things he doesn't want to do. See, I'm not holding back. I warned them I wouldn't. I hope Chris doesn't mind my being chosen to do this instead of him, because he is really a good writer. He did look a bit hurt, a bit jealous even, but he hasn't been in this from the start, so it wouldn't have worked. Well, I'd better stop biting my tongue and start biting the bullet. There's only one way to do this, and that's to tell it in order, chronological order. I know writing it down is important to us. That's why we all got so excited when Robin suggested it. It's terribly, terribly important. Recording what we've done in words on paper. It's got to be our way of telling ourselves that we mean something, that we matter, that the things that we've done have made a difference. I don't know how big a difference, but a difference. Writing it down means we might be remembered, and by God that matters to us. None of us wants to end up as a pile of dead white bones, unnoticed, unknown, and worst of all, with no one knowing or appreciating the risks we've run. That makes me think that I should be writing this like a history book, in very serious language, all formal. But I can't do that. Everyone's got their own way, and this is mine. If they don't like my way, they'll have to find someone else. Okay, better do it then. It all began when... They're funny, those words. Everyone uses them, without thinking what they mean. When does anything begin? With everyone, it begins when you're born. Or before that, when your parents got married. Or before that, when your parents were born. Or when your ancestors colonized the place. Or when humans came squishing out of the mud and slime, dropped off their flippers and fins, and started to walk. But all the same, all that aside, for what's happened to us there was quite a definite beginning. So... It all began when Corrie and I said we wanted to go bush, go feral for a few days over Christmas holidays. It was just one of those stupid things. Oh, wouldn't it be great if... We camped out quite often. We'd been doing it since we were kids, taking motorbikes all loaded with gear and going down to the river, sleeping under the stars, or slinging a bit of canvas between 2 trees on cold nights. So we were used to that. Sometimes another friend would come along, Robin or Fee usually. Never boys. At that age, you think boys have as much personality as coat hangers, and you don't notice their looks. Then you grow up. Well, there we were, only weeks ago, though I can hardly believe it, lying in front of the television watching some junk and talking about the holidays. Corrie said, "We haven't been down to the river for ages. Let's do that." Okay. Hey, let's ask Dad if we can have the Land Rover. Okay. Hey, let's see if Kevin and Homer want to come. God, yeah, boys, but we'd never be allowed. I reckon we might. It's worth a try. Okay. Hey, if we get the Land Rover, let's go further. Wouldn't it be great if we could go right up to Taylor's and into hell? Yeah, okay, let's ask. Taylor's. Taylor's Stitch is a long line, and a rate that goes dead straight from Mount Martin to Wobegonu. It's rocky and very narrow and steep in places, but you can walk along it and there's a bit of cover. The views are fantastic. You can drive almost up onto it at one point, near Mount Martin, on an old logging track that's hard to find now, it's so overgrown. Hell is what's on the other side of Taylor's, a cauldron of boulders and trees and blackberries and feral dogs and wombats and undergrowth. It's a wild place, and I didn't know anyone had been there, though I'd stood on the edge and looked down at it quite often. For one thing, I couldn't see how you'd get in there. The cliffs all around it are spectacular, hundreds of meters high in places. There's a series of small cliffs called Satan's Steps that drop into it, but believe me, if these are steps, the Great Wall of China is our back fence. If there was any access, the cliffs had to be the way, and I'd always wanted to give it a go. The locals all told stories about the hermit from hell, an ex-murderer who was supposed to have lived up there for years. He was meant to have killed his own wife and child. I wanted to believe in his existence, but I found it a bit difficult. My brain kept asking myself awkward questions like, how come he didn't get hung, like they did to murderers in those days? Still, it was a good story, and I hoped it was true. Well, not the murderer's part, but the hermit part at least. Anyway, the whole thing, the trip, grew from there. We made this casual decision to do it, and we immediately let ourselves in for a lot of hard work. The first job was to persuade our mums and dads to let us go. It's not that they don't trust us, but, as Dad said, it's a pretty big ask. They spent a lot of time saying no, but trying to talk us into other things instead. That's the way most parents operate, I think. They don't like to start a fight, so they suggest alternatives that they think they can say yes to, and they hope you might say yes to. Why don't you go down to the river again? Why don't you ask Robin and Miriam instead of the boys? Why don't you just take the bikes, or even the horses, make it a real old-fashioned camp-out? That'd be fun. Mum's idea of fun was making jam for the preserve section of the Wirrawee show, so she was hardly an authority on the subject. I feel a bit odd writing things like that, considering what we've all been through, but I'm going to be honest, not mushy. Finally, we came to an agreement, and it wasn't too bad considering. We could take the Land Rover, but I was the only one allowed to drive it, even though Kevin had his P's and I didn't. But Dad knows I'm a good driver. We could go to the top of Taylor's Stitch. We could invite the boys, but we had to have more people, at least 6 and up to 8. That was because Mum and Dad thought there was less chance of an orgy if there were more people. Not that they'd admit that was the reason. They said it was to do with safety. But I know them too well. And yes, I've written that O in no carefully. I wouldn't want it to be confused with an E. We had to promise not to take grog and smokes, and we had to promise that the boys wouldn't. It made me wonder about the way adults turn growing up into such a complicated process. They expect you to be always on the lookout for a chance to do something wild. Sometimes they even put ideas into your head. I don't think we would have been bothered to take any grog or smokes anyway. Too expensive for one thing. We were all pretty broke after Christmas. But the funny thing is that when our parents thought we were doing something wild, we never were. And when they thought we were being innocent, we were usually up to something. They never gave me a hard time about the school play rehearsals, for instance, but I spent all my time there with Steve, undoing each other's buttons and buckles, then frantically doing them up again when Mr. Casser started bellowing, "Steve? Ellie? Are they at it again? Someone, get me a crowbar!" Very humorous guy, Mr. Casser. We ended up with a list of 8, counting us. We didn't ask Elliot, because he's so lazy, or Miriam, because she was doing work experience with Fee's parents. But 5 minutes after we made the list, one of the boys on it, Chris Lang, turned up at my place with his dad, so we immediately put the question to them. Mr. Lang's a big guy who always wears a tie, no matter where he is or what he's doing. He seems kind of heavy and serious to me. Chris says his father was born on the corner of straight and narrow, and that sums it up. When his dad's around, Chris stays pretty quiet, but we asked them as they sat at our kitchen table, pigging out on Mum's date scones, and we got knocked back in one sentence. It turned out that Mr. and Mrs. Lang were going overseas, and even though they had a worker, Chris had to stay home and keep an eye on the place. So that was a bad start to our plans. Next day, though, I took a bike and rode across the paddocks to Homer's. Normally I'd go by road, but Mum's been getting a bit twitchy about the new cop in Wirrawee, who's been booking people left, right and centre. His first week in town he booked the magistrate's wife for not wearing a seatbelt. Everyone was being careful till they'd broken this guy in. I found Homer down at the creek, testing a valve that he'd just cleaned out. As I arrived, he was holding it high, watching it optimistically to see if it was leaking. "Look at that," he said as I got off the Yamaha. "Tight as a drum." "What was the problem?" "I don't know. All I know is that 3 minutes ago it was losing water and now it isn't. That's good enough for me." I picked up the pipe and held it for him as he started screwing the valve back on. "I hate pumps," he said. "When Papa pops off, I'm going to put dams in every paddock." "Good. You can hire my earth-moving business to put them in." "Ah, is that your latest?" He squeezed the muscles on my right upper arm. "You'll be able to dig dams by hand the way you're going." I gave a sudden shove to try and push him into the creek, but he was too strong. I watched him pump the pipe up and down to force water into it, then helped him carry buckets up to the pump to finish the priming. On the way I told him our plans. "Oh, yeah? I'll have a go at that," he said. "I'd rather we went to a tropical resort and drank cocktails with umbrellas in 'em, but this'll do in the meantime." We went back to his place for lunch, and he asked his parents for permission to come on the camp. "Ellie and I are going bush for a few days," he announced. That was Homer's way of asking permission. His mother didn't react at all. His father raised an eyebrow from above his cup of coffee, but his brother started firing the questions. When I gave the dates, his brother George said, "What about the show?" "We can't go any earlier," I said. "The Mackenzies are shearing." "Yeah, but who's going to groom the bulls for the show?" "You're a class act with a hairdryer," Homer said. "I've seen you in front of the mirror Saturday nights. Just don't go woggy with the bulls and put oil through their coats." He said to me, "Papa's got a 44-gallon drum of oil in the shed, especially for George on Saturday nights." As George was not known for a sense of humour, I kept my eyes down and had another mouthful of tabbouleh. So Homer was organised, and Corrie rang that night to say Kevin was coming too. "He wasn't all that keen," she said. "I think he'd rather go to the show, but he's doing it for me." "Oh, yuck, vomit, spew," I said. "Tell him to go to the show if that's what he wants. There's plenty of guys who'd kill to come with us." "Yeah, but they're all under 12, Corrie sighed. "Kevin's little brothers are desperate to come, but they're too young, even for you." "And too old for you," I replied rudely. I rang Fiona after the call from Corrie and told her our plans. "Do you want to come?" I asked. "Ah!" She sounded amazed, as if I'd told her all about the trip just to entertain her. "Oh, gosh! Do you want me to?" I didn't even bother to answer that one. "Oh, gosh!" Fee was the only person I knew under 60 who said gosh. "Who else is coming?" "Corrie and me, Homer and Kevin, and we thought we'd ask Robin and Lee." "Well, I'd like to. Wait a second, I'll go and ask." It was a long wait. At last she came back with a series of questions. She relayed my answers to her mother or father, or both, in the background. After about 10 minutes of this, there was another long conversation. Then Fee picked up the phone again. "They're being difficult," she sighed. "I'm sure it'll be okay, but my mum wants to ring your mum to make sure. Sorry." "That's cool. I'll put you down with a question mark and I'll talk to you at the weekend, okay?" I hung up. It was getting hard to use the phone because the TV was yelling at me. Mum had turned it up too loud so she could hear the news in the kitchen. An angry face filled the screen. I stopped and watched for a moment. "We've got a wimp for a foreign minister," the face was shouting. "He's weak, he's gutless, he's the new Neville Chamberlain. He doesn't understand the people he's dealing with. They respect strength, not weakness." "Do you think defence is high on the government's agenda?" the interviewer asked. "High? High? You must be joking. Do you know what they've cut from the defence budget?" Thank goodness I'm getting away from this for a week, I thought. I went into Dad's office and rang Lee. It took a while to explain to his mother that I wanted her son. Her English wasn't too crash hot. Lee was funny when he came to the phone, almost suspicious. He seemed to react slowly to everything I said, as though he was weighing it up. "I'm meant to be playing at the Commemoration Day concert," he said when I told him the dates. There was a silence, which I finally broke. "Well, do you want to come?" He laughed then. "It sounds more fun than the concert." Corey had been puzzled when I said I wanted to ask Lee. We didn't really hang around with him at school. He seemed a serious guy, very into his music. But I just thought he was interesting. I suddenly realized that we didn't have that much time left at school, and I didn't want to leave without getting to know people like Lee. There were people in our year who still didn't know the names of everyone else in the form, and we were such a small school. I had this intense curiosity about some kids, and the more different they were to the people I normally hung around with, the more curious I was. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. There was another long pause. Silence makes me uncomfortable, so I kept talking. "Do you want to ask your mum and dad?" No, I'll handle them." "Yeah, I'll come." "You don't sound all that keen." "Hey, I'm keen. I was just thinking about the problems. But it's cool. I'll be there. What'll I bring?" My last call was to Robin. "Oh, Ellie," she wailed. "It'd be great, but I'd never be allowed." "Come on, Robin, you're tough. Put the pressure on them." She sighed. "Oh, Ellie, you don't know what my parents are like." "We'll ask them anyway. I'll wait on." "Okay." After a few minutes, I heard the bumping noises of the phone being picked up again, so I asked, "Well, did you con them into it?" Unfortunately, it was Mr. Mathers who answered. "No, Ellie, she hasn't conned us into it." "Oh, Mr. Mathers!" I was embarrassed, but laughing too, because I knew I could twist Mr. Mathers around my pinky. "Now, what's all this about, Ellie?" "Well, we thought it was time we showed independence and initiative and all those other good things. We want to do a bushwalk along Taylor's Stitch for a few days. Get away from the sex and vice of Wirrawee into the clean, wholesome air of the mountains." And no adults?" "Oh, Mr. Mathers, you're invited, as long as you're under 30, okay?" "That's discrimination, Ellie." We kidded around for 5 minutes till he started getting serious. "You see, Ellie, we just think you kids are a bit young to be careering around the bush on your own." "Mr. Mathers, what were you doing when you were our age?" He laughed. "All right, one to you. I was jackarooing at Kalamata Downs. That was before I got smart and put on a collar and tie." Mr. Mathers was an insurance agent. "So what we're doing is small time compared to jackarooing at Kalamata Downs." "After all, what's the worst thing that could happen? Hunters in four-wheel drives? They'd have to come through our place and Dad'd stop them. Bushfires? There's so much rock up there, we'd be safer than we would be at home. Snakebite? We all know how to treat snakebite. We can't get lost, because Taylor's Stitch is like a highway. I've been going up into that country since I could walk." "How about we take out insurance with you, Mr. Mathers? Would you say yes then? Is it a deal?" Robin rang back the next night to say it was a deal, even without the insurance. She was pleased and excited. She'd had a long conversation with her parents. The best one ever, she said. This was the biggest thing they'd ever trusted her on, and so she was keen for it to work out. "Oh, Ellie, I hope there's no disasters," she kept saying. The funny thing about it was that if parents ever had a daughter they could trust, it was the Mathers and Robin, but they didn't seem to have worked it out yet. The biggest problem she was ever likely to give them was being late to church, and that'd probably be because she was helping a Boy Scout across the road. Things kept going well. Mum and I were in town shopping Saturday morning, and we ran into Fee and her mum. The two mums had a long, serious conversation while Fee and I looked in Tozer's window and tried to eavesdrop. Mum was doing a lot of reassuring. "Very sensible," I heard her say. "They're all very sensible." Luckily, she didn't mention Homer's latest trick. He'd just been caught pouring a line of solvent across the road and lighting it from his hiding place when a car got close. He'd done it 6 times before he got caught. I couldn't imagine the shock it must have given the drivers of the cars. Anyway, whatever Mum said to Fee's mum worked, and I was able to cross off the question mark next to Fee's name. Our list of 8 was down to 7, but they were all definite and we were happy with them. Well, we were happy with ourselves, and the other 5 were good. I'll try to describe the way they were then, or the way I thought they were, because of course they've changed, and my knowledge of them has changed. For instance, I always thought of Robin as fairly quiet and serious. She got effort certificates at school every year, and she was heavily into church stuff, but I knew there was more to her than that. She liked to win. You should see her at sport. We were in the same netball team, and honestly, I was embarrassed by some of the things she did. Talk about determined. The moment the game started, she was like a helicopter on heat, swooping and darting around everywhere, bumping people aside if she had to. If you got weak umpires, Robin could do as much damage in one game as an aerial gunship. Then the game would end, and Robin would be quietly shaking everyone's hand, saying, "Well played," back to her normal self. Quite strange. She's small, Robin, but strong, nuggety, and beautifully balanced. She skims lightly across the ground, where the rest of us trudge across it like it's made of mud. I should exempt Fee from that, though, because she's light and graceful, too. Fee was always a bit of a hero to me, someone I looked up to as the perfect person. When she did something wrong, I'd say, "Fee, don't do that. You're my role model." I love her beautiful, delicate skin. She has what my mother calls fine features. She looked like she'd never done any hard work in her life, never been in the sun, never got her hands dirty, and that was all true, because unlike us rurals, she lived in town and spent more time playing piano than drenching sheep or marking lambs. Her parents are both solicitors. Kevin. Now he was your more typical rural. He's older than the rest of us, but he was Corrie's man, so he had to come or she would have lost interest straight away. The first thing you noticed about Kevin was his wide, wide mouth. The second thing you noticed was the size of his hands. They were enormous, like trowels. He was known for having a big ego, and he liked to take the credit for everything. He annoyed me quite often for that, but I still thought he was the best thing that ever happened in Corrie's life, because before she started going around with him, she was too quiet and unnoticed. They used to talk a lot at school, and then she'd tell me what a sensitive, caring guy he was, although I couldn't always see that myself. I could see the way she started getting so much more confident from going out with him, and I liked that. I always pictured Kevin in 20 years, when he'd be president of the show society and playing cricket for the club on Saturdays and talking about fat lamb prices and bringing up his 3 kids. With Corrie, maybe. That was the kind of world we were used to, and we never seriously thought it would change much. Lee lived in town, like Fee. "Lee and Fee, from where are we?" we used to sing. That was all they had in common, though. Lee was as dark as Fee was fair. He had a black crew cut and deep brown intelligent eyes, and a nice soft voice which clips the ends off some of his words. His father's Thai and his mother's Vietnamese. They had a restaurant which served Asian food. Pretty good restaurant, too. We went there a lot. Lee was good at music and art. In fact, he was good at most things, but he could be very annoying when things went against him. He'd go into long sulks and not talk to anyone for days at a time. The last one was Homer, who lived down the road from me. Homer was wild, outrageous. He didn't care what he did or what anyone thought. I always remember going there for lunch when we were little kids. Mrs. Janos tried to make Homer eat Brussels sprouts. They had a massive argument, which ended with Homer chucking the sprouts at his mum. One of them hit her in the forehead, pretty hard, too. I watched goggle-eyed. I'd never seen anything like it. If I'd tried that at home, I'd have been chained to the tractor and used as a clodbuster. When we were in Year 8, Homer organized some of his madder mates into daily games of what he called Greek roulette. In Greek roulette, you'd go every lunchtime to a room that was away from the teacher's eyes, and then you'd take it in turns to walk up to a window and headbutt it. Each person kept doing it till the bell went for afternoon classes or the window broke, whichever came first. If it was your head that broke the window, then you, or your parents, had to foot the bill for a new one. They broke a lot of windows playing Greek roulette before the school finally woke up to what was going on. Homer always seemed to be in trouble. Another of his favorite little amusements was to watch workmen going up on the roof at school to fix leaks or get balls or replace guttering. Homer would wait till they were safely up there, working away hard at whatever they had to do, then he'd strike. Half an hour later you'd hear yells and cries from the roof. "Help! Get us down from here! Some mongrel's pinched our bloody ladder!" Homer had been quite short as a little kid, but he'd filled out and grown up a lot in the last few years, until he ended up one of the biggest guys in the school. They were always at him to play footy, but he hated most sports and wouldn't join a team for anything. He liked hunting and would often ring my parents to ask if he and his brother could come to our place to wipe out a few more rabbits. And he liked swimming. And he liked music, some of it quite weird. Homer and I had spent all our free time together when we were little, and we were still close. So that was the famous 5. I guess Corrie and I made it the secret 7. Ha! Those books don't have a lot of bearing on what's happened to us. I can't think of any books I've read, or films I've seen, that relate much to us. We've all had to rewrite the scripts of our lives the last few weeks. We've learnt a lot, and we've had to figure out what's important, what matters, what really matters. It's been quite a time. Chapter 2. The plan was to leave at 8 o'clock, nice and early. By about 10 o'clock we were nearly ready. By 10:30 we were about 4 k's from home, starting the ascent to Taylor's Stitch. It's a long, slow grunt up a track that's become a real mess over the years. Holes so big I thought we'd lose the Land Rover in them. Mudslides, creek crossings. I don't know how many times we stopped for fallen trees. We brought the chainsaw, and after a while Homer suggested we keep it running, and he'd nurse it as we drove along, to save having to start it when we came to another log. I don't think he was serious. I hope he wasn't serious. It had been a long time since anyone had been up there. We always know because they have to come through our paddocks to get up to the spur. If Dad had known how bad the track was, he would never let us take the Land Rover. He trusts my driving, but not that much. Still, we bounced along, me wrestling with the wheel, doing a steady 5 k's with the occasional bursts up to 10. There was another unscheduled stop about halfway when Fee decided she was going to be sick. I stopped fast. She exited through the rear door looking white as a corpse and donated a sticky mess in the bushes for the benefit of any passing feral dogs or cats. It was not a pretty sight. Everything Fee did, she did gracefully, but even Fee found it hard to be graceful while she was vomiting. After that she walked quite a while, but the rest of us continued to lurch up the spur in the landy. It was actually fun, in a strange sort of way. Like Lee said, it was better than the cocktail shaker ride at the show, because it was longer, and it was free. We were actually missing the show to come on this trip. We'd left the day before the commemoration day, when the whole country stops. But in our district, people don't just stop. They stop, and then they converge on Wirrawee, because Commemoration Day is traditionally the day of the Wirrawee show. It's quite an occasion. Still, we didn't mind missing it. There's a limit to the number of balls you can roll down the clown's throat, and there's a limit to the number of times you can get excited over your mother winning Best Decorated Cake. A year's break from the show wouldn't do us any harm. Well, that's what we thought. It was about 2:30 when we got to the top. Fee had ridden the last couple of k's, but we were all relieved to get out of the landy and stretch our bones. We came out on the south side of a knoll near Mount Martin. That was the end of the vehicle track. From then on it was Shank's pony. But for the time being we wandered around and admired the view. On one side you could see the ocean, beautiful Cobbler's Bay, one of my favorite places, and according to Dad, one of the world's great natural harbors, used only by the occasional fishing boat or cruising yacht. It was too far from the city for anything else. We could see a couple of ships there this time, though. One looked like a large trawler, maybe. The water looked as blue as royal blood, deep and dark and still. In the opposite directions, Taylor's Stitch steamed its way to the summit of Mount Martin, a sharp, straight ridge, bare black rocks forming a thin line as though a surgeon had made a giant incision centuries ago. Another view faced back down the way we'd come, the track invisible under its canopy of trees and creepers. Way in the distance you got glimpses of the rich farmland of the Wirrawee district, dotted with houses and clumps of trees, the lazy Wirrawee River curving slowly through it. And on the other side was hell. "Wow!" said Kevin, taking a long look into it. "We're gonna get into there?" "We're gonna try," I said, having doubts already, but trying to sound strong and sure. "It's impressive," said Lee. "I'm impressed." "I've got 2 questions," said Kevin, "but I'll only ask one of them. How?" "What's the other one?" "The other one is why. But I'm not going to ask that. Just tell me how, and I'll be satisfied. I'm easily satisfied." "That's not what Corey says," said Homer, beating me to it. A few rocks were thrown. There was some wrestling. Homer nearly took the fast route into hell. That's 2 things guys are addicted to: throwing rocks and wrestling. But I've noticed these guys don't seem to do either anymore. I wonder why. So how are we going to get in there? Kevin asked again at last. I pointed to the right. There it is. That's our route. That collection of cliffs. He was exaggerating a bit, but not much. Satan's Steps are huge granite blocks that look like they were chucked there in random descending order by some drunken giant back in the Stone Age. There's no vegetation on them. They're uncompromisingly bare. The more I looked at them, the more unlikely it all seemed. But that didn't stop me making my big motivational speech. Guys, I don't know if it's possible or not, but there's plenty of people around Wirrawee who say it is. If you believe the stories, there was an old ex-murderer lived in there for years. The hermit from hell. If some pensioner can do it, we sure can. I think we should give it our best shot. Let's make like dressmakers and get the tuck in there. Gee, Ellie, said Lee with respect. Now I understand why you're captain of the netball team. How do you get to be an ex-murderer? Robin asked. Eh? Well, what's the difference between an ex-murderer and a murderer? Robin always did go straight to the point. I've got one more question, Kevin said. Yeah? Do you actually know anyone who's been down there? Let's get the packs out of the landy. We did that, then sat down against them, admiring the views and the old blue sky and munching on chicken and salad. Fee's pack was in direct line of vision from me, and the more I looked at it, the more I began to realize how swollen it seemed. Fee, I said at last, just what have you got in that pack? She sat up, looking startled. Well, what do you mean? Just clothes and stuff, same as everyone else. What clothes exactly? What Corrie told me. Shirts, jumpers, gloves, socks, undies, towel. But what else? That can't be all. She started looking a bit embarrassed. Pajamas? Oh, Fee. Dressing gown? Dressing gown? Fee? Well, you'll never know who you'll meet. What else? I'm not telling you anymore. You'll all laugh at me. Fee, we've still got to get the food into these packs, and then carry them God knows how far. Do you think I should take out the pillow then? We formed a committee of 6 to reorganize Fee's backpack for her. Fee was not a member of the committee. After that, we distributed the food that Corrie and I had so carefully bought. There seemed to be a mountain of it, but there were 7 of us, and we planned to be away 5 days. But try as we might, we couldn't get it all in. Some of the bulky items were a big problem. We ended up having to make some tough decisions between the Vita Brits and the marshmallows, the pita bread and the jam donuts, the muesli and the chips. I'm ashamed to say what won in each case, but we rationalized everything by saying, well, we mightn't get far from the landy anyway, so we can always come back for the stuff. At about 5 o'clock we got moving, packs on our backs like giant growths, strange protuberances. We set off along the ridge, Robin leading, Kevin and Corrie quite away in the rear, talking softly, more absorbed in each other than in the scenery. The ground was hard and dry. Although Taylor's stitch was straight, the track wound around, on it and off it. But the footing was easy and the sun still high in the sky. We were each carrying 3 full water bottles, which added a lot to the weight of the packs, but which still wouldn't last us long. We were relying on finding water in hell, assuming we could get in there. Otherwise, we would return to the landy in the morning for more water. When the supply in the jerry cans there gave out, we drove a couple of k's down to the track to a spring where I'd often camped with Mum and Dad. I walked along with Lee and we talked about horror movies. He was an expert. He must have seen 1,000. That surprised me because I knew him mainly for his piano and violin, which didn't seem to go with horror movies. He said he watched them late at night when he couldn't sleep. I got the feeling he was probably quite a lonely guy. From the top, Satan's Steps looked as wild and forbidding as they had from a distance. We stood and looked, waiting for Kevin and Corrie to catch up. Said Homer. Interesting. That was about the shortest sentence I'd ever heard from him. There must be a way, Corrie said, arriving at that moment. When we were kids, I said, we used to say that looked like a track down to the left there. We always told ourselves that was the hermit's path. We used to scare ourselves by imagining that he'd appear at any moment. He was probably just a nice, misunderstood old man, Fee said. Don't think so, I said. They say he murdered his wife and baby. I don't think it's a path anyway, Corrie said. Just a fault line in the rock. We kept standing and looking for quite a while, as if staring at the tumbled rocks would cause a path to appear, as if this were Narnia or somewhere. Homer wandered along the escarpment a bit further. We could get over the first block, I think, he called back to us. That ledge on the other side, it looks like it drops pretty close to the ground at the far corner. We followed over to where he stood. It certainly looked possible. Suppose we get down there and can't go any further, Fee asked. Then we climb back and try something else, Robin said. What if we can't get back? What goes down must come up, Homer said, making it clear how much attention he'd been paying in science over the years. Let's do it, Corrie said with surprising firmness. I was glad. I didn't want to push people too much, but I felt that the whole success or failure of this expedition reflected on me, or at least on Corrie and me. We talked them into coming, we'd promised them a good time, and it was our idea to take the plunge into hell. If we had a miserable failure, I'd feel awful. It'd be like throwing a party and then playing Mum's themes from popular TV shows all evening. At least they seemed willing to take a shot at the first of Satan's steps. But even the first step was difficult. We had to drop into a tangle of old logs and blackberries, then scrambled up the tilted, scarred face of the rock. We got quite scarred ourselves. There was a fair bit of swearing and sweating and pulling other people up and hanging on to other people's packs before we were all standing on top, peering down at Homer's ledge. If they're all as difficult as this, Fee panted without needing to finish the sentence. Over here, Homer said. He got on his hands and knees, turned to face us, and then slid backwards over the edge. Oh, yes? Fee said. No worries, we heard Homer say. There was a worry, and that was how were we going to get back up again. But no one else mentioned it, so I didn't. I think we were too caught up in the thrill of the chase. Robin followed Homer. Then Kevin, with much scrabbling and grunting, lowered himself cautiously after them. I went next, scratching my hand a bit. It wasn't easy because the heavy packs kept wanting to overbalance us, to pull us backwards. By the time I got down, Homer and Robin were already jumping off the end of the ledge and fighting their way through the scrub to inspect the second huge block of granite. The other side looks better, Lee said. I followed him around there and we inspected the possibilities. It was very difficult. There was quite a sheer drop either side of the block, despite the bushes and grasses growing out of the cliff, and the rock itself was sheer and high. Our only hope was an old fallen log that disappeared into the shadows and undergrowth, but at least seemed to be going in the right direction. That's our path, I said. Homer said, coming up beside us. I straddled the log and started a slow slide down it. She loves it, doesn't she? Kevin said. I grinned as I heard the slap of Corrie's hand hitting some part of Kevin's exposed flesh. The log was soft and damp, but was holding together. It was surprisingly long, and I realized it was taking me under the front of the rock. Huge black beetles and slaters and earwigs started spilling out of the wood between my legs as I got towards the thin and more rotten end. I grinned again, hoping I'd scared them all away before Fee followed me down here. When I stood up, I found I was under an overhang, free of vegetation but facing a screen of trees that almost concealed the next giant block. Would be able to force a way through the screen, no doubt getting torn and scratched a lot more, but there was no guarantee we could get around or over or under the granite. I sidestepped along, peering through the screen, looking for possibilities, as the others started joining me. Fee was the fourth, arriving a little breathless but without fuss. Funnily enough, it was Kevin who was unnerved by the insects. He slid the last few yards down the tree in a rush, yelling hysterically, "God, no! Help! There's creepy crawlies everywhere! Get them off me! Get them off me!" He spent the next 3 minutes brushing himself fiercely, spinning around and around in the narrow space we had, trying to catch glimpses of any more that might be on him, shaking his clothes frantically. I couldn't help wondering how he coped with fly-struck sheep. Things calmed down with Kevin, but we still couldn't see any way out of the overhang. "Well," said Robin cheerfully, "looks like we camp here for a week." There was a bit of silence. "Ellie," Lee said kindly, "I don't think we're going to find a way down, and the further we go, the harder it's going to be to get back." "Let's just try for one more step," I asked, then added a little wildly, "3's my lucky number." We poked around a bit more, but rather doubtfully. Finally Corrie said, "There might be a chance if we wiggle through here. We might be able to get around the side somehow." The gap she'd picked was so narrow we had to take our packs off to get through it, but I was game, so I took Corrie's pack while she wrestled her way into a prickly, overgrown hole. Her head disappeared, then her back, then her legs. I heard Kevin say, "This is crazy." Then Corrie said, "Okay, now my pack." So I pushed that through after her. Then, leaving Robin to look after my pack, I followed. I soon realized that Corrie had the right idea, but it sure was difficult. If I wasn't such a stubborn, pig-headed idiot, I would have surrendered by this point. We ended up crawling along like mixed-toed rabbits, me pushing Corrie's pack ahead of me. But I caught glimpses of a wall of rock on my left, and we were definitely going downhill, so I figured we were probably getting around the third of Satan's steps. Then Corrie paused in front of me, forcing me to stop too. "Hey," she said, "can you hear what I hear?" There are some questions that really annoy me, like, "What do you know? Are you working to your full capacity?" Our form teacher's favorite. "Guess what I'm thinking?" And, "What on earth do you think you're doing, young lady?" Dad, when he's annoyed. I don't like any of them. And, "Can you hear what I hear?" is in the same category. Plus, I was tired, hot, frustrated, so I gave a bad-tempered answer. After a minute's pause, Corrie, showing more patience than me, said, "There's water ahead, running water." I listened, and then realized I could hear it too, so I passed the word back to the others. It was only a small thing, but it kept us going that little bit longer. I crawled on grimly, listening to the sound get louder and closer. It had to be quite a busy stream, which at this altitude meant a spring. We could all do with a fresh, cold drink of water that came from these mountain springs. We'd need it for the struggle back up to the top of hell, and it was time we started that struggle. It was getting late, time to set up a campsite. Suddenly I was at the stream, and there was Corrie standing on a rock grinning at me. "Well, we found something," I said, grinning back. It was a pretty little thing. The sun didn't reach it, so it was dark and cool and secret. The water bubbled over the rocks that were green and slippery with moss. I knelt and soaked my face, then lapped like a dog as the others started to arrive. There wasn't much room, but Robin started exploring in one direction, stepping gingerly from rock to rock, as Lee did the same in the other direction. I admired their energy. "It's a nice creek," said Fee, "but Ellie, we better start heading back up the top." "I know. Let's just have a relax first for 5 minutes. We've earned it." "This is worse than the Outward Bound course," Homer complained. "I wish I'd gone on that now," Fee said. "You all went, didn't you?" I'd gone on the course and enjoyed it. I'd done a lot of camping with my parents, but Outward Bound had given me a taste for something tougher. I just started thinking about it, remembering, when suddenly Robin reappeared. The look on her face was almost frightening. In the dense overgrowth, I couldn't stand, but I straightened up as far as I could and quickly. "What's happened?" Robin said with the air of someone who is hearing her own voice but not believing her own words, "I just found a bridge." Chapter 3. The path was covered with leaves and sticks, and was a bit overgrown in places, but compared to what we'd been down, it was like a freeway. We stood spread out along it, marveling. I almost felt dizzy with relief and astonishment and gratification. "Ellie," Homer said solemnly, "I'll never call you a stupid, dumb, obstinate slag heap again." "Thanks, Homer." It was a sweet moment. "Tell you what," said Kevin, "it's lucky I wouldn't let you pikers give up back there when you all wanted to wimp out." I ignored him. The bridge was old, but had been beautifully built. It crossed the creek in a large clearing and was about 1 meter wide and 5 meters long. It even had a handrail. Its surface was made of round logs rather than planks, but the logs were matched and cut with perfect uniformity. Joints cut in each end married the logs to crossbars, and the first and last ones were then secured to the crossbars by wooden pegs. "It's a lovely job," said Kevin. "Reminds me of my own early work." Suddenly we had so much energy. It was as though we were onto something. We nearly decided to camp in the clearing, which was cool and shadowy, but the urge to explore was too strong. We hoisted our packs on our backs again, and chattering like cockatoos, we hustled down the path. It must be true about the hermit. No one else would have gone to all that trouble. Yeah, wonder how long he was here for. How do you know it was a he? Well, the locals always talked about him as a male. Most hymns are talked about as males. That was Lee, being a smart-ass. He must have been here years to go to all that trouble with the bridge. And the track's so well worn. If he did live here years, he'd have time to do the bridge and a lot more. Imagine how you'd fill your time. Yeah, food'd be the big thing. Once you organize your meals, the rest of the day be yours. I wonder what you'd live on. Possums, rabbits, maybe? It wouldn't be so many rabbits in this kind of country. There's wallabies, plenty of possums, feral cats. Yuck. You could grow vegetables. Bush tucker. Yeah, he probably watched that show on TV. Wombats? Yeah, what would wombats taste like? They say most people eat too much anyway. If he just ate when he was really hungry, he wouldn't need much. You can train yourself to eat a lot less. You know Andy Farrer? He found a walking stick in the bush near Wombagonu. It's beautifully made, handmade, all carved and everything. Everyone said it must be the hermits, but I thought they were joking. The track was taking us downhill all the time. It wound around a bit, looking for the best route, but the trend was always downhill. It was going to be quite a sweat getting back up. We'd lost a lot of altitude. It was beautiful, though. Quiet, shady, cool and damp. There were no flowers, just more shades of green and brown that the English language knows about. The ground was deep in leaf litter. There were times when we lost the track beneath heaps of bark and leaves and twigs, but a search around under the trees always found it again. Every so often it brought us back to Satan's Steps, so that for a few meters we'd be brushing alongside the great granite walls. Once it cut between 2 of the steps and continued down the other side. The gap was only a couple of meters wide, so it was almost a tunnel through the massive hunks of rock. "This is pretty nice for hell," Fee said to me as we paused in the cool stone gap. Wonder how long since anyone's been down here." "More than that," Robin, who was in front of Fee, said. "I wonder how many human beings have ever been down here in the history of the universe. I mean, why would the Kooris have bothered? Why would the early explorers or settlers have bothered? And no one we know has. Maybe the hermit and us are the only people ever to have seen it. Ever." By that stage it was getting obvious that we were close to the bottom. The ground was levelling out and the last of the sunlight was filtering through to warm our faces. The overgrowth and undergrowth were both sparser, though still quite dense. The track rejoined the creek and ran alongside it for a few hundred meters. Then it opened out into our campsite for the night. We found ourselves in a clearing about the size of a hockey field, or a bit bigger. It would have been hard to play hockey on, though, because it wasn't much of a clearing. It was studded with trees, 3 beautiful old eucalypts, and quite a few suckers and saplings. The creek was at the western edge. You could hear it but not see it. The creek was flatter and wider here and cold, freezing cold, even on a summer day. In the early mornings it hurt and stung, but when you were hot it was a wonderful, refreshing shock to splash your face into it. That's where I am now, of course. For any little wild things living in the clearing, we must have seemed like visitors from hell, not visitors to it. We made a lot of noise, And Kevin, you can never cure Kevin of his bad habit of breaking branches off trees instead of walking a few extra meters to pick up dead wood. That's one reason I was never too convinced when Corrie talked about how caring and sensitive he was. But he was good with fires. He had the white smoke rising about 5 minutes after we arrived, and flames burning like fury about 2 minutes after that. We decided not to bother with tents. We'd only bought 2.5 anyway, but it was so warm and no chance of rain, so we just strung up a couple of flyers for protection against the dew. Then Lee and I got stuck into the cooking. Fee wandered over. "What are we having?" she asked. 2-minute noodles for now. We'll cook some meat later, but I'm too hungry to wait." "What are 2-minute noodles?" Fee asked. Lee and I looked at each other and grinned. "It's an awesome feeling," Lee said, "to realize you are about to change someone's life forever." "Haven't you ever had 2-minute noodles?" I asked Fee. "No, my parents are really into health foods." I'd never met anyone who hadn't had 2-minute noodles before. Sometimes Fee seemed like an exotic butterfly. I can't remember any hike or camp-out I'd been on where people sat around the fire telling stories or singing. It just never seemed to happen that way. But that night we did sit up late and talk and talk. I think we were excited to be there, in that strange and beautiful place where so few humans have ever been. There aren't many wild places left on Earth, yet we'd fluked it into the middle of this little wild kingdom. It was good. I knew I was really tired, but I was too revved up to go to bed until the others started yawning and standing up and looking towards their sleeping bags. 5 minutes later, we were all in bed. 5 minutes after that, I think I was asleep. Chapter 4. We didn't do a lot the next day. No one got up till 10 or 11 o'clock. First thing we found was a biscuit bag we'd overlooked when packing the food the night before. It was empty. Thanks to us, some grateful animal was now a lot fatter. Our breakfast merged into lunch and continued into the afternoon. Basically, we just lay around and ate, in one long pig-out. Kevin and Corrie got into a passionate little session on Kevin's sleeping bag. Fee and I sat with our feet in the cold stream, planning our lives after we left school and left Wirrawee. Lee was reading a book, All Quiet on the Western Front. Robin had a Walkman on. Homer had a go at everything, climbed a tree, had a look in the creek for gold, got a pile of firewood, tried to flush out some snakes. When I got some energy going, I went with him, to see if the path went any further. But we could find no trace of it. Thick bush met us in every direction. And strangely, we could see no sign of any hut or cave or shelter, which the old guy must have had if he really lived down here. Finally, sick of trying to tear our way through the unsympathetic scrub, we gave up and went back to the clearing. When we got there, Homer did find a snake. It was 6 o'clock and the ground was starting to cool off. Homer went to his sleeping bag and took off his boots, then stretched out comfortably with a packet of corn chips. "This is a great place," he said. "This is perfect." At that moment the snake, which had crawled into his sleeping bag, must have stirred under him, because Homer leapt to his feet and ran about 10 meters away. "Jesus Christ!" he yelled. "There's something in there! There's a snake in my sleeping bag!" Even Kevin and Corrie stopped what they were doing and came racing over. There was a wild debate, first about whether Homer was imagining things, then, when we all saw the snake move, about how to get it out with as little loss of life as possible. Kevin wanted to weigh the sleeping bag down in the creek with rocks until the snake drowned. Homer wasn't keen on that. He liked his sleeping bag. We weren't too sure the snake wouldn't be able to bite through the bag. As a kid, I was told a terrifying story by a shearer about how his son had been bitten through a blanket as he lay asleep in his bed. I don't know if the story was true, but I never forgot it. We decided to trust all those experts who've been telling us since we were kids that snakes are more scared of people than people are of snakes. We figured if we were at one end of the sleeping bag and the snake came out of the other end, he'd probably do a big slither in the opposite direction, straight into the bush. So we got 2 strong sticks. Robin held one while Kevin held the other. They pushed them under the bag and started slowly lifting. It was a captivating scene, better than watching TV even. For a minute nothing happened, though we could see the snake clearly outlined as the material was stretched. He sure was a big one. Robin and Kevin were trying to tip the bag so that the snake would virtually be poured out of the mouth onto the ground. They were doing it well, too. Perfect teamwork. The bag was at shin height, then knee height, and still rising. Then somehow the sticks got too far apart. Corrie called out. They realized and started to correct, but Robin lost her grip for a moment. And a moment was all it took. The sleeping bag slithered down to the ground as though it had come to life itself, and one very mad snake came bursting out. The only rational thought I had at that moment was curiosity, that Kevin was obviously as nervous of snakes as he was of insects. He just stood there white in the face and trembling, looking like he was going to cry. I think he was so paralyzed that he would have waited and let the snake crawl up his leg and bite him. It was funny considering how tough he'd been when he had the stick and was lifting the bag, thinking he was safe. But there wasn't really much time or space for rational thought at that stage of my life. My irrational mind was running the show. It told me to panic. I panicked. It told me to run. I ran. It told me not to give a stuff about anyone else. I didn't give a stuff. It was quite a few moments before I looked around to see if they were okay, and to see where the snake was. Kevin was still standing at the same spot. Robin was a few meters in front of me and doing what I was doing, standing and looking and puffing and trembling. Fee was in the creek. I've got no idea why. Lee was up a tree about 6 meters from the ground and rising fast. Corrie was intelligently at the fire and using it as protection. Homer was nowhere to be seen. Neither was the snake. "Where is it?" I yelled. "It went that way," said Corrie, pointing into the bush. "It chased me, but when I got here I jumped over the fire and it veered away." For someone who'd just been chased by a frenzied snake, she seemed the calmest of us all. "Where's Homer?" I asked. "He went that way," said Corrie, pointing in the opposite direction to the snake. That sounded safe enough even for Homer. I slowly stopped panicking and came into the fire. Lee, looking a bit sheepish, began descending the tree. Even Homer appeared eventually, coming cautiously out of the dense patch of scrub. "Why were you standing in the creek?" I asked Fee. "To get away from the snake, of course." "But Fee, snakes can swim?" "No, they can't. Can they?" Oh my God, I could have died! Thanks for telling me, guys!" That was the end of our major excitement for the day, unless you count the sausage surprise that Homer and Kevin produced for tea. It certainly was full of surprises, and like the snake, it was the kind of excitement I could do without. We went to bed pretty early. It had been one of those days where everyone was exhausted from doing nothing. I climbed into the sleeping bag at about 9:30, after first checking carefully that it was empty. By that stage, only Fee and Homer were still up, talking quietly at the fire. I slept pretty soundly, pretty heavily, and this night was typical. At one point I woke up, but I've got no idea what time it was. Maybe 3 or 4 o'clock. It was a cold night. I needed to go to the dunny, but spent 10 minutes trying to put it off. It just seemed too cruel to have to crawl out of that snug sleeping bag. I had to give myself a stern lecture. "Come on, you know you have to go. You'll feel better when you do. Stop being such a wimp. The quicker you do it, the quicker you'll be back in this warm bag." Eventually it worked. I struggled grimly out and staggered about 10 meters to a convenient tree. On my way back, a couple of minutes later, I paused. I thought I could hear a distant humming. I waited, still unsure, but it became louder and more distinct. It's funny how artificial noises sound so different to natural noises. For a start, artificial noises are more regular and even, I guess. This was definitely an artificial noise. I realized it had to be some sort of aircraft. I waited, looking up at the sky. One thing that's different up here is the sky. This night was like any clear, dark night in the mountains. The sky sprinkled with an impossible number of stars, some strong and bright, some like tiny weak pinpricks, some flickering, some surrounded by a hazy glow. Most views I get tired of eventually, but never the night sky in the mountains. Never. I can lose myself in it. Suddenly the loud buzzing became a roar. I couldn't believe how quickly it changed. It was probably because of the high walls of rock that surrounded our campsite, and like black bats screaming out of the sky, blotting out the stars, a V-shaped line of jets raced overhead. Very low overhead, and then another, till 6 lines in all had stormed through the sky above me. Their noise, their speed, their darkness frightened me. I realized that I was crouching, as though being beaten. I stood up. It seemed that they were gone. The noise faded quickly till I could no longer hear it. But something remained. The air didn't seem as clear, as pure. There was a new atmosphere. The sweetness had gone. The sweet, burning coldness had been replaced by a new humidity. I could smell the jet fuel. We thought that we were among the first humans to invade this basin, but humans had invaded everything, everywhere. They didn't have to walk into a place to invade it. Even hell was not immune. I got back to the sleeping bag and Fee said sleepily, "What was that noise?" It seemed that she was the only one awake, though I could hardly believe it. "Planes," I said. I thought so," she said. "Coming back from Common Day, I suppose?" Of course, I thought. That's what it'll be. I started to drift into a kind of sleep, restless and full of wild dreams. It still hadn't occurred to me that there was anything strange about dozens of aircraft flying fast and low at night without lights. It wasn't until much later that I even realized they had no lights. In the morning at breakfast, Robin said, "Did anyone else hear those planes last night?" "Yes," I said. "I was up. I'd been to the toilet." "They just never stopped," Robin said. "Must have been hundreds." "There were 6 lots," I said, "close together and really low, but I thought you slept through it." Fee was the only one who said anything. Robin stared at me. 6 lots? There were dozens and dozens all night long, and Fee was asleep. "I thought you were too. Lee and I were counting them, but everyone else had just snored away." "God," I said, starting to realize, I must have heard a different lot to you. "I didn't hear anything," said Kevin, tearing the wrapper off his second Mars bar. He claimed that he always had 2 Mars bars for breakfast, and so far on this hike he was right on schedule. "It's probably the start of World War III, said Lee. "We've probably been invaded and don't even know." "Yes," said Corrie from a sleeping bag. "We're so cut off here. Anything could happen in the outside world and we'd never hear about it." "That's good, I reckon," said Kevin. "Imagine if we came out in a few days and there'd been a nuclear war and there was nothing left and we were the only survivors," Corrie said. "Chuck us a muesli bar, someone, will you please?" "Apple, strawberry, apricot," Kevin asked. "Apple." "If there'd been a nuclear war, we wouldn't survive," Fee said. "That fallout'd be dropping softly on us now, like the gentle rain from heaven above. We wouldn't even know about it." "Did you do that book last year in English?" Kevin asked. "X or something? Z? Z for Zachariah?" "Yeah, that one. That was good, I reckon. Only decent book we've ever done." "Seriously," said Robin, "what do you think those planes were doing?" "Coming back from Common Day," Fee said, as she had during the night. "You know how they have all those fly-pasts and displays and stuff?" "If you were going to invade, that would be a good day to do it," Lee said. "Everyone's out celebrating. The Army and the Navy and Air Force are all parading around the city showing off. Who's running the country?" "I'd do it Christmas Day," Kevin said. "Middle of the afternoon, when everyone's asleep." It was a pretty typical conversation, I guess, but for some reason it was getting on my nerves. I got up and went down to the creek, where I found Homer. He was sitting on a gravel spit, combing through the stones with a flat rock. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Looking for gold." "Do you know anything about it?" "No." "Found any?" "Yeah, heaps. I'm putting it in piles behind the tree so the others don't see it." "That's pretty selfish." "Yeah, well, that's the kind of guy I am. You know that." He was right about one thing. I did know him well. He was like a brother. Being neighbours, we'd grown up together, and although he had a lot of annoying habits, he wasn't selfish. "Hey, El," he said, after I sat there for a few minutes watching him scrutinize the gravel. "Yeah?" "What do you think of Fee?" I nearly fell into the creek. When someone asks you that question in that tone of voice, it can only mean one thing. But coming from Homer, the only women Homer admired were the ones in magazines. Real women he treated like beanbags. And Fee, of all people. Still, I wanted to answer his question without putting him off. "I love Fee, you know that. She seems so perfect sometimes." "Yeah, you know, I think you might be right." He got embarrassed at admitting even that much and spent a few more minutes scratching for gold. "Guess she thinks I'm just a big loudmouth, huh?" he said at last. "I don't know. I haven't got a clue, Homer, but I don't think she hates you. You were chatting on like old buddies last night." "Yeah, I know." He cleared his throat. "That's when I realized, well, it's the first time I really took much notice of her. Since I was a little guy anyway. I always thought she was just a stuck-up snob, but she's not. She's really nice." "I could have told you that." "Yeah, but she lives in that big house and she talks like Mrs. Hamilton, and me and my family, we're just Greek peasants to people like her." "He's not like that. You ought to give her a chance." "Gee, I'll give her a chance. Trouble is, I don't know if she'll give me one." He stared moodily into the gravel, sighed and stood up. Suddenly his face changed. He went red and started wriggling his head around like his neck had got uncomfortable after all these years of connecting his head to his body. I looked around to see what set him off. It was Fee, coming down to the creek to brush her perfect teeth. It was hard not to smile. I'd seen people struck by the lightning of love before, but I never thought it would happen to Homer. And the fact that it was Fee took my breath away. I just couldn't imagine what she'd think or how she'd react. My best guess was that she'd think it was a big joke, let him down quickly and gently, and then come and have a good giggle with me about it. Well, not that she'd laugh to be cruel. It was just that no one took Homer very seriously. He'd always encouraged people to believe he had no feelings. He used to say, "I've got a radium heart, take 5,000 years to melt down." He'd sit in the back of the class encouraging girls to criticize him. "Yeah, I'm insensitive, what else? Sexist? Come on, is that all you can think of? You can do better than this. Ooh, Sandra, get stirred up." They get madder and madder, and he'd keep leaning back on his chair, smiling and taunting them. They knew what he was doing, but they couldn't help themselves. So after a while we started believing him when he said he was too tough to have emotions. It seemed funny that Fee, the most delicately built girl in our year, looked like being the one to bring him undone, if that's the right way to put it. I went for a walk back up the track, to the last of Satan's steps. The sun had already warmed the great granite wall, and I leaned against it with my eyes half shut, thinking about our hike and the path and the man who built it and this place called Hell. Why did people call it Hell, I wondered. All those cliffs and rocks and that vegetation. It did look wild, but wild wasn't hell. Wild was fascinating, difficult, wonderful. No place was hell. No place could be hell. It's the people calling it hell. That's the only thing that made it so. People just sticking names on places so that no one could see those places properly anymore. Every time they looked at them or thought about them, the first thing they saw was a huge big sign saying Housing Commission or Private School or Church or Mosque or Synagogue. They stopped looking once they saw those signs. It was the same with Homer. The way for all those years he'd been hanging a big sign around his neck, and like a fool I'd kept reading it. Animals were smarter. They couldn't read. Dogs, horses, cats, they didn't bother reading any signs. They used their own brains, their own judgment. No, hell wasn't anything to do with places. Hell was all to do with people. Maybe hell was people. Chapter 5. We got fat and lazy camping in the clearing. Every day someone would say, "Okay, today we're definitely going up the top and doing a long walk." And every day we'd all say, "Yeah, I'll come. Yeah, we're getting too slack. Yeah, good idea." Somehow, though, we never got round to it. Lunchtime would creep up on us, and then there'd be a bit of serious sleeping to do, a bit of reading or paddling in the creek. Then it'd be mid-afternoon getting on to late afternoon. Corrie and I were probably the most energetic. We took a few walks back to the bridge or different cliffs so we could have long private conversations. We talked about boys and friends and school and parents, all the usual stuff. We decided that when we left school we'd earn some money for 6 months and then go overseas together. We got really excited about it. "I want to stay away for years and years," Corrie said dreamily. "Corrie, you got homesick on the Year 8 camp and that was only 4 days. That wasn't real homesickness. That was because Ian and them were giving me such a hard time. Weren't they such mongrels? I hated them. Remember when they got caught bombing us with firelighters? They were crazy. At least they've improved since then. Ian's still a dork. I don't mind him now. He's all right." Corrie was much more forgiving than me, more tolerant. "So will your parents let you go overseas?" I asked. "I don't know. They might if I work on them long enough. They let me apply for that exchange thing, remember? Your parents are so easy to get on with. So are yours? Oh, most of the time I guess they are. It's only when Dad's in one of his moods. And he is awfully sexist. All that stuff I had to go through just to come on this trip. If I was a boy, it'd be no problem. My dad's not so bad. I've been educating him. I smiled. A lot of people underestimated Corrie. She just quietly worked away on people till she got what she wanted. We figured out our itinerary. Indonesia, Thailand, China, India, then up to Egypt. Corrie wanted to go from there into Africa, but I wanted to go to Europe. Corrie had this idea that she'd have a look at everything. Come home, do nursing, and then go back and work in the country that needed nurses most. I admired her for that. I was more interested in making money. So the time drifted by. Even on our last full day, when food was getting short, no one could be bothered going all the way back to the Land Rover to get more. Instead, we improvised and put together snacks that at any other time we would have chucked at the nearest rubbish bin. We ate meals that I wouldn't have fed to our chooks. There was no butter left, no powdered milk, no condensed milk because we'd sucked the tubes dry on our first day, no fruit, no tea, no cheese, no chocolate. That was serious, but not serious enough to motivate us to get off our butts. It's catch-20-something, Kevin explained. If we had chocolate, it'd give me the energy to get up to the landy to get some more. But without it, I don't think I could make it up the first step. It was hot. That was our main excuse. Homer was still wrapped in Fee, always wanting to talk to me about her, trying to accidentally put himself wherever she happened to be going, turning red every time she spoke to him. But Fee was being very frustrating. She wouldn't discuss it with me at all, just pretended she didn't know what I was talking about, when it must have been obvious to anyone short of a coma. The 7 of us had got on through 5 days without a serious argument, which was good going. Quite a few little arguments, I admit. There was a time Kevin had blown up at Fee for not doing any cooking or washing up. It was after the great snake schmozzle. I think Kevin was embarrassed that he hadn't come out of that with much credit. Then his sausage surprise got such a poor response, so he probably was feeling a bit sensitive. Still, Fee was gaining a reputation for disappearing when work appeared, so Kevin wasn't too far wrong. There was Corrie's frequent cry of, "That's not funny, Homer," heard when he tipped cold water on her in the sleeping bag, or when he did cruel and disgusting things to a black beetle, when he dropped a spider down her shirt, when he tore out the last page of her book and hid it so she didn't know whether the lovers made up or not. Corrie was one of Homer's favourite victims. He only had to give her a glimpse of the red cape and she charged straight at it every time. He was lucky she didn't hold grudges. If I'm going to be honest, I better admit that I managed to annoy 1 or 2 people once or twice. Kevin told me that I was a know-all when I made a few suggestions about rearranging the fire. In fact, the fire got me into trouble a few times. I guess I liked fiddling with it a bit too much. Whenever it died down a little, or the smoke started coming in the wrong direction, or the billy wasn't over the best coals, I'd be in there with a stick fixing it. Well, that's what I called it. The others called it being a bloody nuisance. My worst fight was really stupid. I don't know, maybe all fights are really stupid. We started talking about the colours of cars and which ones are the most conspicuous and which one's the least. Kevin said white was the most conspicuous and black was the least. Lee said yellow and green. I said red and khaki. I forget what the others said. Suddenly I got quite heated. "Why do you think they paint ambulances and police cars white?" Kevin yelled. "Why do you think they paint fire engines red?" I yelled back. "Why do you think they have so many yellow taxis?" Lee yelled a bit, although I don't think his heart was in it. It went on and on. I thought I was on safe ground with khaki for inconspicuous, because that's what the army uses. But Kevin told some long story about how he nearly had a head-on with a black car a week after he got his P's. "That doesn't prove black's hard to see," I said. "It proves you shouldn't be allowed on the roads." I can't even remember how it ended, which goes to show how stupid it was. But on our last night, sitting around the fire playing True Confessions, Robin unexpectedly said, "I don't want to go back. This is the best place, and this has been the best week." "Yeah," Lee said. "It's been great." "I'm looking forward to a hot shower, though," Fee said, "and decent food." "Let's do this again," Corrie said. "Back here in the same place with the same people?" "Yeah, okay," Homer said, obviously thinking of another 5 days to spend adoring Fee. "Let's keep this place a secret," Robin said. "Otherwise everyone will start using it and it'll be wrecked in no time." "It is a good campsite," I said. "Next time we should have a proper search for where the hermit lived." "He might have just had a shelter here and it's fallen down," Lee said. "But he built that bridge so well, you'd think he'd build a shelter even better." "Well, maybe he just lived in a cave or something." True confessions resumed, but I went to bed before they could make me confess to all the things I'd done with Steve. I figured I'd told enough already. So I got out while the going was good. But I still didn't sleep well. Like I said, normally I was a heavy sleeper, but the last few nights I couldn't settle down to it. To my own surprise, I realized I was quite anxious to get home and see how things were, to make sure it was all okay. I did feel some kind of strange anxiety. In the morning, everyone got moving early. It's a funny thing. You can have 90% of the work done in the first hour, but the other 10% takes at least 2 hours. That's Ellie's law. So it was nearly 11 o'clock and starting to warm up before we were ready to go. A last check of the fire, a regretful farewell to our secret clearing, and we hit the track. It was a steep climb, and we soon began to realize why we hadn't been too keen to do day trips back up onto Taylor's Stitch. Our biggest motivation, apart from Fee's enthusiasm for showers and food, was to see where the track started at the top. We couldn't figure out how we, and all those other people over the years, had missed it. So we kept plugging along, sweating and grunting up the hardest bits, sometimes pushing the person in front through a narrow gap in Satan's steps. I noticed Homer stayed close to Fee, giving her helpful pushes whenever he got the chance, and she'd smile at him and he'd go red. Could she possibly like him, maybe? I wondered. Or was she enjoying stringing him along? It'd serve Homer right if a girl did that to him. One girl could get revenge for all of us. Our packs were lighter thanks to all the food we'd eaten, though after a short time they felt as heavy as ever. But soon enough we were close to the top and looking ahead to see where we'd come out. The answer, when we got close enough to tell, was surprising. The track suddenly veered right away from Satan's steps and struck out across a landslide of loose gravel and rocks. This was the first time we'd been out in the open since leaving the campsite. It took a few minutes to find it again on the other side because it was much fainter and thinner. It was like going from a road onto a four-wheel drive track. It was in public view, but it still would have been invisible to anyone standing on the arete, and anyone stumbling across it would have thought it was just an animal track. It continued to wind upwards then, finishing at a big old gum tree near Wombegonu. The last 100 meters were through scrub so thick we had to bend double to get along the path. It was almost like a tunnel, but it was very clever because people looking down from Wombegonu could see only impenetrable bush. The gum tree was at the base of a sheet of rock that stretched up to Wombegonu's summit. It was an unusual tree because it had multiple trunks, which must have parted from each other in its early days, so that they now grew out like petals on a poppy. The track actually started in the bowl in the middle of the tree. It brought us cunningly into the bowl by leading us under one of the trunks. The bowl was so big that the 7 of us could squash into it. Either side of the tree and below it was the jungly scrub of hell. Above was the sheet of rock which, as Robin said, would leave no tracks. It was a perfect setup. We took a break on Wombegonu, not for too long because we had virtually no food left, and we'd all been too lazy to carry any water up from the creek. It was about a 40-minute walk to the faithful Land Rover, which we found where we'd left it, backed in under the shady trees, patiently waiting. We fell upon it with cries of delight, getting into the water first, then pigging out on the food, even the healthy stuff that we'd rejected 5 days earlier. It's amazing how quickly your attitudes can change. I remember hearing on the radio someone saying how prisoners of war had been so grateful for any little scrap of food when they were liberated at the end of World War II, and then 2 days later they were complaining because they got chicken noodle soup instead of tomato. That was just like us, and still is. That day at the Landy I was dreaming of an ice cream I'd chucked out from the fridge at home a week earlier because it had too many little ice crystals sticking to it. I'd have given anything to have had it back in my hand. I couldn't believe how casually I'd thrown it away. But after an hour or two at home, I guess I would have thrown it away again. Once we got to the Land Rover, it seemed like the others lost any sense of urgency to get home. It was a hot day, humid, with quite a lot of low cloud drifting past. You couldn't see the coast at all. It was the kind of weather that sapped your energy. That wasn't really true of me, though. I was still a bit uneasy, keen to get back, wanting to check that everything was okay. But I couldn't force the others to go at my pace. I was affected by Robin telling me just that morning that I was bossy. I was a bit hurt by that, especially coming from Robin, who didn't normally say unkind things. So I kept quiet while everyone lay around in the patchy sunlight, sleeping off the effects of all the food we'd just eaten. After a while, Kevin and Corrie disappeared down the road away. Homer was lying as close as he dared get to Fee, but she didn't seem to be taking any notice of him. I talked to Lee a bit about life in the restaurant. It was interesting. I didn't realize how hard it was. He said his parents wouldn't use microwaves or any modern inventions. They still did things in the traditional way, so that meant a lot more work. His father went down to the markets twice a week, leaving at 3:30 in the morning. I didn't think running a restaurant would suit me once I heard that. Eventually, around mid-afternoon, we got going, picking up Kevin and Corrie down the road a kilometre or so. We lurched our way down at about the same speed as we'd lurched our way up. As we got a better view of the plains, we were surprised to see 6 different fires in the distance, scattered across the countryside. 2 looked quite big. It was really too early in the year for major bushfires, but too late for burning off. But that was the only unusual thing we noticed, and none of the fires were remotely close to our places. At the river there was a majority vote for a swim, so we stopped again for a long time, more than an hour. I was getting quite edgy, but there was nothing I could do to hurry them up. I only swam for 5 minutes, and Lee didn't go in at all. So when I came out of the water, I sat and talked to him again. After a while, I said, "I wish they'd get a move on. I'm really keen to get home." Lee looked at me and said, "Why?" "I don't know. I'm in a funny mood. A bad mood." "Yes, you seem a bit wound up." "Maybe it's those fires. I can't figure them out." "But you've been uptight most of this hike." "Have I?" "Yeah, I suppose I have. I don't know why." "It's strange," Lee said slowly, "but I feel the same way." "Do you? You don't show it." "I try not to." "Yeah, I believe that." "Maybe it's guilt," I added after a while. "I feel bad about missing the show. We exhibit there quite a lot. Dad thinks we should support it. It takes ages grooming stock and getting them in there and brushing them and feeding them and walking them and then presenting them. Dad was cool about it, and I did help groom them, but I left him with an awful lot of work." "Do you only take them in there to help keep the show going?" "No, it's quite an important show, especially for Charolais. It helps keep your name in front of people so they realize you're a serious breeder. You've got to be so PR conscious nowadays. That's the one thing the same about restaurants. Here they come." Sure enough, Robin and Fee, the last 2 people left in the water, were coming out, dripping and laughing. Fee looked fantastic, flicking her long hair out of her eyes and moving with the grace of a heron. I sneaked a look at Homer. Kevin was talking to him, and Homer was trying to act like he was listening, while he stared frantically at Fee out of the corner of his eye. But looking again at Fee, I was sure she knew. There was something just a bit self-conscious about the way she was walking, and the way she stood there in the cooling sunlight, like a model doing a fashion shoot on a beach. I think she knew, and loved it. It was about half an hour from the swimming hole to home. I don't know if I was happy that day. Those tense and edgy feelings were getting stronger and stronger. But I do know that I've never been happy since. Chapter 6. The dogs were dead. That was my first thought. They didn't jump around and bark when we drove in, or moan with joy when I ran over to them, like they'd always done. They lay beside their little galvanized iron humpies, flies all over them, oblivious to the last warmth of the sun. Their eyes were red and desperate, and their snouts were covered with dried froth. I was used to them stretching their chains to their limits. They did that in their manic dancing whenever they saw me coming. But now their chains were stretched and still, and there was blood around their necks, where their collars had held. Of the 5 dogs, 4 were young. They shared a water bucket, but somehow they'd knocked it over and it lay on its side, dry and empty. I checked them quickly in horror, one by one, all dead. I ran to Millie, their old mother, whom we separated from the younger dogs because they irritated her. Her bucket was still standing and held a little water. As I came close to her, she suddenly gave a feeble wag of her tail and tried to stand. I was shocked that she was still alive, after I'd made up my mind that she too must be dead. The rational thing to do would have been to leave her and rush into the house, because I knew that nothing so awful could have happened to the dogs, unless something more awful had happened to my parents. But I had already stopped thinking rationally. I slipped Millie's chain off and the old dog staggered to her feet, then collapsed forward onto her front knees. I decided, brutally, that I couldn't spend any more time with her. I'd helped her enough. I called to Corrie, "Do something for the dog," and started running for the house. Corrie was already moving that way. Her mind was working faster than the others, who were still standing around looking shocked, starting to realize that something was wrong but not making the connections that I was making. I was making them too fast, and that was adding to my terror. Corrie hesitated, turned towards the dogs, then called to Kevin, "Look after the dogs, Kev." Then she followed me. In the house nothing was wrong, and that was what was wrong. There was no sign of life at all. Everything was neat and tidy. At that time of the day there should have been food spread out on the kitchen table. There should have been dishes in the sink. The TV should have been chattering in the background. But all was silent. Corrie opened the door behind me and came in quietly. "Jesus, what happened?" she said, not as a question. The tone of her voice terrified me even more. I just stood there. "What's wrong with the dogs?" she asked. "They're all dead except Millie, and she's nearly dead." I was looking around for a note to me, but there was nothing. "Let's ring someone," she said. "Let's ring my parents." "No, ring Homer's parents. They're the nearest. They'll know." She picked up the phone and handed it to me. I turned it to talk and started pressing numbers, and then realized that I heard no dial tone. I held it closer to my ear. There was nothing. I felt a new kind of fear now, a kind of fear I hadn't known about before. "There's nothing," I said to Corrie. "Oh, Jesus," she said again. Her eyes got very wide and she started going quite white. Robin and Fee came into the kitchen with the others close behind them. "What's happening?" they were asking. "What's wrong?" Kevin came in carrying Millie. "Get her some food from the cool room," I said. "I'll go," Homer said. I tried to explain everything, but I got confused trying to do it as quickly as possible and ended up taking too long. So I stopped and Jess said wildly, "We've got to do something." At that moment, Homer came in with a bowl of mints and a smell. "The power's off in the cool room," he said. "It stinks terrible." "Terribly," I said in absent-minded fear. He just looked at me. Robin went to the TV as Homer and Kevin tried to persuade Millie to eat. We watched Robin as she switched on the set, but it too was dead. "This is weird," she said. "Did they say they were going to go away?" Fee asked. I didn't bother to answer. "If your grandmother got sick," Corrie said. "So they cut off the power?" I asked sarcastically. "Some big electrical problem," Kevin suggested. "Maybe if the power was off for days, they had to move." "They'd have left a note?" I snapped. "They wouldn't let the dogs die." There was a moment's silence. No one knew what to say. "There's just no explanation that fits all this," Robin said. "It's like UFO stuff," Kevin said. "Like aliens have taken them away." Then seeing the expression on my face, he quickly added, "I'm not trying to make a joke of it, Ellie. I know something bad's happened. I just can't figure out what it could possibly be." Lee whispered something to Robin. I didn't bother to ask them what it was. When I saw the naked fear on Robin's face, I didn't want to ask. I made a big mental effort to get control of myself. "Let's get back to the Land Rover," I said. "Bring the dog. We'll go down to Homer's." "Wait a sec," Lee said. "Have you got a transistor radio? A battery one?" Yeah, I don't know where," I said, looking at him strangely. I still didn't know what he had in mind, but I didn't like the look on his face, any more than I liked the look on Robin's. "Why?" But I didn't want him to answer. "I've got my Walkman in the Land Rover," Robin said. He turned to her. "Have you heard any news bulletins since we've been away?" "No, I tried a few times to pick up radio stations, but I couldn't get any. I guess the cliffs around hell cut them off." "Can you find your radio?" Lee said to me. "I guess." I ran to my bedroom. I didn't want to be wasting time like this. I desperately wanted to get to Homer's place and run to kind Mrs. Janos and have her hug me and hold me and explain everything away, so that it became just a simple little mistake. But there was something terrible in Lee's mind, and I couldn't ignore it. I came back with the radio, switching it on as I rushed along the corridor, spinning the tuner to find a station. By the time I got to the kitchen, I'd already scanned the whole range once and got nothing but static. Must have gone too fast, I thought, like I always do. I never learn. I started the second search as the others watched anxiously, uncomprehending. This time I was slow and careful, but the result was the same. Nothing. Now we were all really frightened. We looked at Lee as though we expected him to magically have the answer. He just shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "Let's get to Homer's." As with the radio, so with the Land Rover. I revved it so hard and dropped the clutch so roughly that Kevin, who was still sitting down, hit his head and hurt it, nearly dropping Millie, whom he was still nursing. The Landy kangaroo hopped a few meters and stalled. I could hear Grandma's voice saying, "More haste, less speed." I took a deep breath and tried again, more calmly. This time was better. We went out the gate and down the road with me saying to Homer, "I forgot to check the chooks." "Okay, Ellie," he said. "It'll be cool. We'll work it out." But he didn't look at me, just sat forward on the seat peering anxiously through the windscreen. Homer's place is about 1.5 km from ours. The one thing we wanted to see, the only thing, as we approached, was movement. There was none. As we bumped over the cattle grid, I was pressing the horn, making it roar, until Lee called out urgently from the back, "Don't do that, Ellie." Again, I was scared to ask why, but I stopped pressing the horn. We skidded hard to a halt near the front door, and Homer hit the ground running. He flung the door open and ran in, calling, "Mum! Dad!" But before I'd even left the driver's seat, the hollowness of his voice gave me my answer. I walked towards the door. As I did so, I heard the Land Rover start up behind me. I turned and looked. Lee was at the wheel. I watched. He was a terrible driver, but with much over-revving he got the vehicle into the shadows under the big old peppercorn tree, behind the tank stand. Memories of a light-hearted conversation in hell suddenly came back to me, and suddenly I knew, and I hated and feared the memory. Lee climbed out of the car and came walking towards me, heading for the front door. I screamed at him, "Lee, you're wrong. Stop doing these things. Stop thinking these things. You're wrong." Robin came up behind me and grabbed my arm. "He probably is," she said. "But the radio—" She paused. "Hold yourself together, Ellie, just till we know." We walked into the house together. As we went through the front door into the bleak dead silence, she added, "Pray hard, Ellie. Pray really hard. I am." I could hear a bellowing noise from out the back of the house, and I walked straight to the yard and found Homer, grim-faced, trying to milk their cow. Milk was leaking from her teats, and she was shifting uncomfortably and bellowing whenever he tried to touch her. "Can you milk, Ellie?" he asked quietly. "No, sorry, Homer. I never learned. I'll ask the others." As I went back in, he called out, "The budgie in the sunroom, Ellie." "Okay," I called and ran. But Corrie had already reached the budgie, who was alive, but with just a little bit of mouldy water in its cage. We bought him fresh water, which he drank like Dad with his first beer after shearing. "You've got a milker at home, haven't you?" I asked Corrie. "Can you take over from Homer out the back?" "Sure," she said and went. We all started acting with unnatural calmness. I knew how frightened Corrie and the others must be now for their own families, but there was nothing we could do for them quite yet. I took the budgie into the kitchen, where Lee was putting down the phone. I raised my eyebrows at Lee. He shook his head. Homer came in a moment later. "There's an RF radio in the office," he said, without looking at anyone. "What's an RF radio?" Fee asked. I hadn't noticed her, standing in the door of the pantry. "Rural firefighting," Homer said briefly. "Would it be safe?" Robin asked. "I don't know," Homer said. "Who knows anything?" With desperate urgency, passionate to convince them, I said, "This is ridiculous. I don't know what you're thinking, and it is completely, absolutely impossible. Absolutely not possible. These things just don't happen. Not here, not in this country." Then, with a sudden hope, I remembered something. Those fires! They'll be out fighting those fires. There must have been some bad ones, so bad they couldn't get back. Homer said, "Ellie, they weren't that kind of fire. You know that. You know what a bad fire looks like." Lee said, "I don't know much about these things, but shouldn't your RF radio be alive with voices while those fires are burning?" "Yes," said Homer, turning in a hurry. "But there's no power," Fee said. They have backup batteries, I said. We rushed after Homer and crowded into the little office. Homer was turning the volume knob on the radio up to full, but there was no need. Endless, monotonous static filled the room. Did you check the frequency? I asked quietly. Homer nodded, his face full of misery. I wanted to hug him, looked for Fee to see if she might be going to, and then went ahead when I realized she'd left the room again. After a minute, Homer said, Do you think we should send out a call on the radio? What do you think, Ellie? Lee asked me. I knew I had to admit all the possibilities now. I remembered how tense things had been before we left, all those politicians shouting and carrying on. Trying to think calmly, I said, The only reason for calling up would be if we can get help for our families, if they're in trouble or danger. But if they are, everyone must be in the same boat, and the authorities must know about it, so we wouldn't be helping our families by transmitting the call. The only other reason for calling is because we're so desperate to find out. But okay, I admit we may create danger for ourselves. I tried to keep my voice steady. If there's something bad happened, if there's people out there... So on balance? Lee asked. I don't think we should call, I said sadly. I agree, Homer said. Me too, Lee said. Then it's Corey's turn, Homer said, and Kevin's. I don't even know where Robin lives. Just outside town, I said. Well, I guess geographically Corey and Kevin come first. He looked at Lee, who nodded without speaking. He'd already figured out who was last. The 7 of us came together in the kitchen with almost perfect timing. Corey carrying a bucket of milk. The milk stank. It looked like pale, scrambled eggs. Kevin was with her. They were gripping each other's hands, hanging on tight. I poured some of the milk into a salad bowl and gave it to Millie, who at last started to show some enthusiasm. She sniffed it and then lapped it eagerly. Kevin said to Homer, Do you mind if we go to our places? We'll go on our own if we can have a vehicle or... He looked at me. The Land Rover. Dad said I was the only... I started, then stopped, realizing how weak it sounded. But I'd done enough logical thinking in the Janos's office. Robin took over. We've got to think, guys. I know we all want to rush off, but this is one time we can't afford to give in to our feelings. There could be a lot at stake here. Lives, even. We've got to assume that something really bad is happening. Something quite evil. If we're wrong, then we can laugh about it later. But we've got to assume that they're not down the pub or gone on a holiday. Of course it's bad, I yelled at her. Do you think my dad would leave his dogs to die like that? Do you think I'll be having a good laugh about that tomorrow? I was screaming and crying at the same time. There was a pause. Then suddenly everyone lost control. Robin started crying and yelling. I didn't mean it that way, Ellie. You know I didn't. Corey was shouting, Shut up! Everyone shut up! Kevin was rubbing his fingers through his hair going, Oh, God, what's going on? Fee had her hand in her mouth and looked like she wanted to eat it. She was so white I thought she was about to faint. Suddenly Homer, madly, said, Fee, I've heard of biting your nails, but that's ridiculous. We all looked at Fee, and a moment later we were all laughing. Hysterical laughter. But it was laughter. Lee had tears pouring down his face, but now he wiped them away and said quickly, Let's listen to Robin. Come on, everyone. I'm sorry, Robin, I said. I know you didn't mean... I'm sorry, too, she said. It was a bad choice of words. She took a deep breath and clenched her fists. You could see her calming herself, like she did at netball sometimes. At last she continued, Look, everyone, I didn't want to say much, just that we've got to be careful. If we go rushing around the countryside to 7 different houses, well, it mightn't be such a bright thing to do, that's all. We should decide some things like whether to stick together or break into small groups like Kevin and Corey want to do, whether we should use the vehicles, whether we should go any further in daylight. It's almost dark now. For a start, I suggest no one goes on from here until it is dark, and that when they do go, they don't use lights. What do you think's happened? I asked. Do you think the same as Lee? Well, said Robin, there's no sign of anyone leaving in a hurry, like in an emergency. They left some days ago, and they expected to come back some days ago. Now what's something that everyone would have gone off to some days ago expecting to come back? We all know the answer to that. Commemoration Day, said Corey. The show. Exactly. Homer, I said, is there some way you can tell if your parents came back from the show? I mean, if I'd thought of it before, I could have looked for a couple of our bulls that I know Dad was showing, that he wouldn't have sold for any price, and he wouldn't have come back from the show without them. I mean, he would have kept those bulls in the bedroom if Mum had let him. Homer thought for a minute. Oh, yes, he said. Mum's needlepoint. She enters a new piece every year. Then win, lose, or draw, she brings it back and hangs it on her honor wall. She gets a big thrill putting it up there. Hang on a sec. He ran out and we waited in silence. He was back a moment later. Nothing, he said. It's not there. Okay, Robin said. Let's assume that a lot of people went to the show and didn't come back. And let's assume that since Commem Day, all power and phones have been cut. All radio stations are off the air, and there have been a number of fires. And the people who went to the show wanted to come back, but couldn't. Where does that get us? And there's the other thing, Lee said. Robin looked at him. Yes, she said. Lee continued. The night of the show, those hundreds of aircrafts, maybe even more than hundreds, that came in over the coast, flying low and at high speed. And without lights, I added, realizing that critical point for the first time. Without lights? Kevin said. You didn't tell us that. It didn't strike me, I said. You know how you notice something, but not consciously? That's what it was like. Let's assume something else, Fee said. She sounded and looked angry. Let's assume that what you're saying is absolutely ridiculous. She sounded like me, in this same room, not very many minutes earlier. Hadn't I said absolutely ridiculous? But now I was starting to come around to Lee and Robin's way of thinking. That little point about the lights had made a difference to me. No legitimate aircraft, no aircraft on a legitimate mission would have been flying without lights. I should have registered it at the time, and I was annoyed at myself that I hadn't. But Fee continued. There are dozens more likely theories, dozens. Look, I don't know why you won't consider them. Okay, Fee, fire away, said Kevin, but fire quickly. The strain was really showing in Kevin's face. All right, said Fee. Number one, they're sick. They went to the show and got food poisoning or something. They're in hospital. Then the neighbours would have been here, looking after the place, Homer said. They got sick too, said Fee. That doesn't explain why all the radio stations are off the air, said Corrie. Everyone's sick then, said Fee. There's a national problem with some illness or disease. That doesn't explain the planes, Robin said. They were just coming back from Commem Day, like we said. Without lights, and so many of them. Fee, I don't know if we even have that many planes. I don't know if our Air Force is that big. Okay, said Fee. There is some national emergency and everyone had to go help. And the planes? It's the Air Force, going to help. And maybe some other country's Air Force too, all helping. Then why would they have no lights? Robin was shouting now, getting mad like she did on the netball court. We don't know that for sure. Fee was shouting too. Fee shouting? First time for everything, I thought. Fee continued. Ellie might have been wrong. It was the middle of the night. She would have been half asleep. I mean, she only just thought to mention it now. She couldn't be that certain. I saw them, Fee, I said. I'm certain. It didn't strike me at the time. My eyes were working, it's just my brain wasn't. Anyway, Robin saw them, and Lee. Ask them. We didn't see them, Robin snapped. We only heard them. Everyone calm down, Homer interrupted. Stay calm or we'll get nowhere. Come on, Fee, what else? I don't know, she said. I just think they've rushed off somewhere to help. Maybe some whales got stranded. So 2 lots of parents rush off without even leaving notes? Kevin asked. But if you take out the planes, said Fee, you haven't got nearly as much, just some little local emergency. Don't forget the radio stations, Robin said. Lee spoke up. Fee, they're all valid theories, and I'm not saying you're wrong. You're probably right, and the planes are just a coincidence, and the radio can be explained away and so on. But the thing that scares the sweat out of me is there is one theory that fits all the facts, and so bloody neatly it's perfect. Remember our conversation that morning in hell? How Commemoration Day would be the ideal day to do it? Fee nodded dumbly, tears rolling down her face. We were all crying now, even Lee, who kept talking as he wept. Maybe all my mother's stories made me think of it before you guys. And like Robin said before, if we're wrong—" He was struggling to get the words out, his face twisting like someone having a stroke. "If we're wrong, you can laugh as long and loud as you want. But for now, let's just say it's true. Let's say we've been invaded. I think there might be a war." Chapter 7. It was terrible waiting for it to get dark. We kept starting out saying, "Okay, that's enough, let's go." And then someone would say, "No, wait, it's still too light." That's the trouble with summer. It's daylight for an awfully long time. But we'd made a decision to play it safe, and we stuck to it. The moon was thin and late to rise, so when we did get going, it really was quite dark. We had a couple of torches that Homer had been able to find, but we agreed not to use them unless absolutely necessary. We left Millie on a blanket in Homer's kitchen. She was too weak to move far. We walked along the road for about 1.5 km and then branched across the last of the Yanu's paddocks, taking a shortcut to the lane that led to Kevin's. I walked with Homer, but we didn't talk much, except when I suddenly remembered I hadn't asked him about their dogs. "We only had 2 left," he said, "and they weren't there. I'm not sure where they might have gone. I think Dad said something about taking them to the vet. They both had eczema badly. I can't remember if he said that or I just imagined it." Once we were in the lane, Kevin started running. There was still about 2 km to go, but without a word being exchanged, we all started running too, behind him. Kevin's a big guy, not built for sprinting, and he lumbered along like a draft horse, but for once we couldn't keep up with him, except Robin, who was always fit. After a while I couldn't see them ahead of us, but I could hear Kevin's heavy panting coming out of the darkness. As we grew closer to the house, Lee called, "Be careful when you get there, Kev!" But he got no reply. He beat us there by 2 or 3 minutes, I'd say, he and Robin. But there wasn't much point. His house was the same as Homer's and mine. 3 dead working dogs on chains, a dead cockatoo in a cage on the veranda, 2 dead potty lambs by the veranda steps. But his old pet corgi had been locked up in the house, with a bucket of food and a bucket of water in the laundry. She was alive, but she'd chosen one of the bedrooms for a toilet, so the house smelt pretty foul. She was delirious with joy to see Kevin. When we got there, she was still leaping at his face, crying pitifully, doing excited mid-air stunts and wetting herself with excitement. Corrie, grim-faced, went past me with a mop and a handful of rags. I noticed when I'd stay with Corrie that if things got too emotional, she'd start cleaning up. It was a useful habit she had. We had another quick conference. There seemed to be so many problems and so many choices. Robin had the bright idea that bicycles were quick and silent, the perfect transport. Kevin had 2 little brothers, so we scored 3 bikes from their shed. Homer asked if we knew anyone who wouldn't have gone to the show. He realized that finding someone who'd stayed at home that day might be the solution to the whole mystery. Lee said he didn't think his parents would have gone. His sisters and brothers usually did, but not his parents. Kevin said he wanted to bring the corgi Flip along with us. He couldn't bear to leave her alone again after what she'd been through. This was a tough one. We all felt sympathetic to the dog, who seemed to be attached to Kevin's heels by a metre of invisible lead, but we were starting to get more and more conscious of our own safety. We finally agreed to take her with us to Corrie's and make another decision depending on what we found there. "But Kevin," warned Lee, "we might have to make some ugly choices." Kevin just nodded. He knew. Robin, who'd thought of the bikes, ended up jogging most of the way to Corrie's. We could only get 2 on a bike, and she said she needed the exercise. Homer dinked Kevin, who nursed Flip in his arms. The little corgi spent the whole trip licking his face in an ecstasy of love and gratitude. It would have been funny if we had any emotional energy left to laugh. The image I'll always remember from Corrie's place is of Corrie standing alone in the middle of the sitting room, tears streaming down her face. Then Kevin came in from checking the bedrooms, saw her, and moving quickly to her, took her in his arms and held her close. They just stood there for quite a few minutes. I liked Kevin a lot for that. Under a lot of pressure from Robin, we agreed to try and eat before doing any more. She'd been so logical all evening, and she was still being logical, even though it was her house we would head for next. So she and I and Homer made sandwiches with stale bread and salami, and lettuce and tomatoes from Mrs. Mackenzie's famous vegetable garden. We made tea and coffee, too, using long-life milk and a little solid fuel camping stove. It was hard to force the food down our dry and choked-up throats, but we nagged and nagged until everyone had eaten at least one sandwich, and it did make a difference to our energy and morale. We decided as we ate that we would go to Robin's, but we knew that we were heading into a whole new set of problems. Out here in the country, where most of us lived, where the air was free and the paddocks wide and empty, We still had been moving fairly confidently. Danger just didn't seem real. We knew that if there was any trouble, if there was danger, it would be in town. Robin described for the ones who hadn't been there the layout of her house and where it was in relation to Werribee. We figured that it should be safe to go in on Coachman's Lane, which was just a dirt track at the back of a few 10-acre blocks, including Robin's. From the hill behind Robin's we could get a glimpse of the town, which might tell us something. It was time to leave. Corrie was waiting for me at the front door. I'd been using the bathroom. I'd forgotten that the Mackenzies weren't on town water, and a pressure pump needs electricity to operate. So I had to go out to the bathtub in the vegetable garden, fill a bucket with water, and come back in, fill the cistern and flush the toilet. Corrie was getting impatient, but I held her up a few moments longer. I was coming down the passageway, past their telephone, when I noticed a message on their fax. "Corrie," I called out, "do you want to see this?" I held it out, adding as she came towards me, "It's probably an old one, but you never know." She took it and read it. As she went from line to line, I saw her mouth slowly open. Her face seemed to become longer and thinner with shock. She stared at me with big eyes, then pushed the message into my hands and stood there, shaking as I read. In a rough scrawl I saw these words, written by Mr. Mackenzie. "Corrie, I'm in the show's secretary's office. Something's going on. People say it's just army maneuvers, but I'm sending this anyway, then heading home to tear it up so no one will know what an idiot I've been. But Corrie, if you do get this, go bush. Take great care. Don't come out till you know it's safe. Much love, darling. Dad." The last 20 or so words were heavily underlined, everything from "go bush" onwards. We looked at each other for a moment, and then had a big hug. We both cried a bit and then ran outside to show the others. I think I must have run out of tears after that day, because I haven't cried again since. When we left the Mackenzies, we moved cautiously. For the first time we acted like people in a war, like soldiers, like guerrillas. Corrie said to us, "I've always laughed at Dad for being so cautious, the way he carries his spirit level everywhere. But his big motto is, 'Time spent in reconnaissance is seldom wasted.' Maybe we had better go with that for a while." We had another bike, Corrie's, so we worked out a way of travelling that we thought was a compromise between speed and safety. We fixed a landmark. The first one was the old Church of Christ, and the first pair, Robin and Lee, were to ride to it and stop. If it was safe, they'd go back and drop a tea towel on the road, 200 metres before the church. The next pair would set out 5 minutes after Robin and Lee, and the last 3, 5 minutes later. We agreed on total silence, and we left Kevin's old corgi Flip chained up at the Mackenzies. Our fear was making us think. For all that, the trip to Robin's was uneventful. Slow, but uneventful. We found her house in the same condition as the others, empty, smelling bad, cobwebs already. It made me wonder how quickly houses would fall apart if people weren't there to look after them. They'd always seemed so solid, so permanent. That poem Mum was always quoting, "Look on my works, ye mighty in despair." That was all I could remember, but it was the first time I started to understand the truth of it. It was 1:30 in the morning. We went up the hill behind Robin's house and looked at Werribee. Suddenly I was very tired. The town was in darkness, no street lights even. There must have been some power, though, because there were quite strong lights at the showground. The floodlights they used for the trotting track and a couple of buildings in the centre of town were lit. As we sat there, we talked softly about our next move. There was no question that we had to try and reach Fee's house, and Lee's. Not because we expected to find anyone, but because 5 of us had seen our homes, had seen the emptiness, had been given a chance to understand, and it was only fair the last 2 should get the same right. A truck drove slowly out of the showground into one of the lit buildings in Barker Street, I think. We stopped talking and watched. It was the first sign of human life, other than our own, that we'd seen since the planes. Then Homer made an unpopular suggestion. "I think we should split up." There was a whispered howl of protest, if you can have that. It was different to Kevin and Corrie's offering to go on their own before. They just hadn't wanted to drag us away from Homer's, but now Homer wouldn't give in. "We need to be out of town before dawn, a long way out of town, and we're running short of time. It's not going to be quick and easy travelling around these streets. We're getting tired, and that alone will slow us down, not to mention the care we'll have to take. Also, 2 people can move more quickly than 7. And finally, to tell you the truth, If there are soldiers here and anyone's caught, well, again, 2's better than 7. I hate to mention the fact, but 5 people free and 2 people locked up is a better equation than no people free and 7 locked up. You all know what a whiz I am at maths. He talked us into silence. We knew he was right, except for the maths part, maybe. So what are you suggesting? Kevin asked. I'll go with Fee. I've always wanted to see the inside of one of those rich houses on the hill. This is my big chance. Fee aimed a tired kick at him, which he allowed to hit his shin. Maybe if Robin and Lee go to Lee's, what do you think? And you other 3 take a closer look at the showground. All those lights, maybe that's their base, or it could be where they're keeping people even. We digested all this. Then Robin said, yes, it's the best way. How about anyone not wearing dark clothes come back to the house and help yourself to some, and we meet back here on the hill at, say, 3 o'clock? What if someone's missing? Fee asked quietly. It was a terrible thought. After a silence, Fee answered her own question. How about we wait till 3:30 if anyone's not back, then move out fast, but come back tonight. And if you're the ones missing, and you get back late, lie low for a day? Yes, said Homer. That's all we can do. Kevin and Corey and I didn't need any darker clothing, so we were ready to go. We stood and hugged everyone and wished them luck. A minute later, when I looked back, I could no longer see them. We picked our way down the hill towards Warrigal Street, climbing through the Mathers' front fence and crept along the side of the road, keeping very close to the tree line. Kevin was leading. I just hope he didn't come across any creepy crawlies. It wouldn't be a good time for him to start yelling and screaming. Although the showground was on the edge of town, it was the opposite side to the edge we were on, so we had quite a walk ahead. But we could move fairly quickly because we were all well away from the main streets. Not that Wirrawie's got many main streets. I was glad that we were moving. It was the only thing keeping me sane. It was so hard concentrating on walking and watching and keeping quiet at the same time. Sometimes I forgot and made a noise. Then the other 2 would turn and look angrily at me. I'd shrug, spread my arms, roll my eyes. I still couldn't comprehend that this might be a matter of life and death, that this was the most serious thing I'd ever been involved in. Of course I knew it. I just couldn't keep remembering it every single second. My mind wasn't that well disciplined. And besides, Kevin and Corey weren't as quiet as they thought they were. It was hard being so dark, too. Hard not to trip over stones or tread on noisy sticks or, on one occasion, bump into a garbage can. We got into Racecourse Road and felt a little safer as there were so few houses along there. Passing Mrs. Alexander's, I stopped for a moment to sniff at the big old roses that grew along her front fence. I loved her garden. She had a party there every year, a Christmas party. It had only been a few weeks since I'd been standing under one of her apple trees, holding a plate of biscuits and telling Steve I didn't want to go with him anymore. Now it felt like it happened 5 years ago. It had been a hard thing to do, and Steve had been so nice about it made me feel worse. Maybe that's why he was so nice about it. Or was I just being cynical? I wondered where Steve was now, and Mrs. Alexander, and the Mathers, and Mum and Dad, and everybody. Could we really have been attacked? Invaded? I couldn't imagine how they would have felt, how they would have reacted. They must have been so shocked, so stunned. Well, some of them would have tried to fight, surely. Some of our friends were hardly the kind of people who would lie down and take it if a bunch of soldiers came marching in to take over their land and houses. Mr. George, for instance, a building inspector, came onto his land last year to tell him he couldn't extend his shearing shed. And Mr. George had been summoned for threatening him with a tire lever. For that matter, Dad was pretty stubborn too. I just hoped there hadn't been violence. I hoped they'd been sensible. I stumbled along, thinking of Mum and Dad. Our lives had always been so unaffected by the outside world. Oh, we'd watched the news on TV and felt bad when they showed pictures of wars and famines and floods. Occasionally I tried to imagine being in the places of those people, but I couldn't. Imagination has its limits. But the only real impact the outside world had on us was in wool and cattle prices. A couple of countries would sign an agricultural treaty thousands of k's away on another continent, and a year later we'd have to lay off a worker. But in spite of our isolation, our unglamorous life, I loved being a rural. Other kids couldn't wait to get away to the city. It was like the moment they finished school, they'd be at the bus depot with their bags packed. They wanted crowds and noise and fast food stores and huge shopping centres. They wanted adrenaline pumping through their veins. I liked those things in small doses, and I knew that in my life I'd like to spend good lengths of time in the city. But I also knew where I most liked to be, and that was out here. Even if I did spend half my life head first in a tractor engine, or pulling a lamb out of the barbed wire fence, or getting kicked black and blue by a heifer when I got between her and a calf. At that stage, I still hadn't come to terms with what had happened. That's not surprising. We knew so little. All we had were clues, guesses, surmises. For instance, I wouldn't allow myself to really consider the possibility that Mum or Dad or anyone else had been injured or killed. I knew in my logical mind that such things were logical outcomes of invasions and fights and wars, but my logical mind was in a little box. My imagination was in another box entirely, and I wasn't letting one transmit to the other. I guess you can't really comprehend that your parents will ever die. It's like contemplating your own death. My feelings were in another box again. During that walk I was desperate to keep them sealed up. But I did let myself assume that my parents were being held somewhere, against their will. I pictured them. Dad, frustrated and angry, like a bull in a pen, refusing to accept what had happened, refusing to accept anyone else's authority. He wouldn't let himself begin to try to understand what was going on, why these people had come. He wouldn't want to know what their language was or their ideas or their culture. Even through my shock and horror, I still wanted to understand. I still wanted answers to those questions. Mum would be different. She'd be concentrating on keeping her mind clear, on not being taken over mentally. I pictured her staring out of the bare hills through the fence of a prison camp maybe, ignoring the petty distractions, the background voices, the deliberate irritations. Then I realized I was just thinking of both my parents as they were at home. We'd reached the end of Racecourse Road. I'd fallen a little behind Kevin and Corrie, and they were waiting for me. We formed a little dark huddle between a tree and a fence. Anyone seeing us might have mistaken us for a strange black growth that had sprouted from the ground. It was getting quite cold, and I felt the other two shivering as we crouched together. "We'll have to be extra careful now that we're so close," Kevin whispered. "Try not to get so far behind, Ellie." "Sorry, I was thinking." "Well, what's the plan?" he asked. "Just to get close enough to have a look," Corrie said. "We don't have all that much time. The main thing's to be careful. If we can't see anything, then we just go back to Robin's. If there's anyone there, the dumbest thing we could do would be to have them see us and come after us." "Okay, agreed," Kevin said. He started standing. That annoyed me. It was typical Kevin not to ask me what I thought. I pulled him back down. "What?" he said. "We've got to get a move on, El." "That doesn't mean rushing in like idiots. For example, what if we do get seen? Or if we get chased? We can't just run back to Robin's place. That'd lead them there." "Well, I guess separate. It'd be harder for them to chase 3 different people than one group. Then if we're all sure we're not being followed, make our own way back to Robin's." "Okay. Is that all?" "No! If we're being strictly logical, like Homer was before, we shouldn't all sneak in close to the showground. One of us should go in and the other 2 stay here. Less chance of being seen, and less loss if one gets caught." Corrie gave a little cry. "No! That's being too logical. You're my best friends. I don't want to be that logical." Neither did I when I thought about it. "Okay then," I said. "All for one and one for all. Let's go. The 3 Musketeers." We slipped across the road like shadows and moved around the corner. The light from the showground reached even here, faintly but enough to make a difference. We stopped at its edge, feeling nervous. It was though a single step into that light would immediately make us visible to a whole army of hostile watchers. It was frightening. That was the first moment at which I started to realize what true courage was. Up till then, everything had been unreal, like a night stalking game at a school camp. To come out of the darkness now would be to show courage of a type that I'd never had to show before, never even known about. I had to search my own mind and body to find if there was a new part of me somewhere. I felt there was a spirit in me that could do this thing, but it was a spirit I hadn't known about. If I could only find it, I could connect with it, and then maybe, just maybe, I could start to defrost the fear that had frozen my body. Maybe I could do this dangerous and terrible thing. A small, single movement was my key to finding my spirit. There was a tree about 4 steps away in front of me and to my left, well inside the zone of light from the showground. I suddenly made myself leave the darkness and go into it, in 4 quick, light steps, a dance that surprised me, but made me feel a little lightheaded and proud. That's it, I thought. I've done it. It was a dance of courage. I felt then, and still feel now, that I was transformed by those 4 steps. At that moment, I stopped being an innocent rural teenager and started becoming someone else, a more complicated and capable person, a force to be reckoned with even, not just a polite, obedient kid. There wasn't time then to explore this new and interesting me, but I promised myself I'd do it later. I still felt lightheaded when Kevin, then Corrie, joined me moments later. We looked at each other and grinned, proud and excited and a little disbelieving. "Okay, what's next?" Kevin asked. Suddenly he was looking to me for directions. Maybe he recognized how I'd been changed in those few seconds. But then surely he had been too. "Keep heading left, from tree to tree. We need to get to that big gum. That'll put us opposite the woodchop area. We'll get a better view from there." I took off as soon as I'd finished speaking, so psyched up I didn't realize I was doing to Kevin what I objected to his doing to me moments earlier. From my new vantage point, I could see human movement. 3 men in uniforms emerged slowly from the shadows behind the grandstand and walked steadily around the perimeter of the wire fence. They carried weapons of some kind, big rifles maybe, but it was too far to see them clearly. Despite all the evidence that we'd had already, this was the first confirmation that an enemy army was in our country and in control. It was unbelievable, horrible. I felt my body fill with fear and anger. I wanted to yell at them to get out. I wanted to run away and hide. I couldn't take my eyes off them. After they'd faded out of sight again, behind the trotter stables, I heard the quick rush of light feet as Kevin and Corrie reached me. "Did you see the men?" I asked. "Well, yes and no," Corrie whispered. "They weren't all men. At least one was a woman." "Really? Are you sure?" She shrugged. "You want to know the color of their buttons?" I took her point. Corrie does have good eyesight. We kept going, making our little dashes from tree to tree, until at last we were gathered, panting behind the big river gum. From there we peered out cautiously. Corrie, kneeling, looking around the base from the right, Kevin, crouching, looking through a low fork, and me, standing on the other side, peeping around the trunk. We were in quite a good spot, about 60 meters from the fence, and able to see a third of the showground. The first thing I noticed was a number of big tents on the oval. They were all different shapes and colors, but they were all big. The second thing was another couple of soldiers, with weapons, standing on the trotting track. They weren't doing anything, just standing, one facing the tents and one facing the pavilions. It was obvious they were sentries, guarding whatever was in the tents probably. One was a woman too. Corrie had been right. The showground was still set up for the show, even though it should have been packed up 4 days ago. But the Ferris wheels and sideshows, the tractor displays and caravans, the logs for the wood chop and the trailers selling fast foods, all were still in position. Away to our left was a silent ocean of parked cars, most sitting like dark, still animals, a few glinting in the artificial light. Our car would be among them somewhere. Some cars would have had dogs in them, too. I tried not to think about their horrible deaths, like the dogs back at our place. Maybe the soldiers had compassion and had rescued them when the fighting was over. Maybe there would have been time for that. We watched for 8 minutes, I was timing it, before anything happened. Just as Kevin leaned around the trunk and whispered to me, "We'll have to go," and I nodded, a man came out of one of the tents. He walked out with his hands on his head and stood there. Immediately the sentries came to life, one of them going quickly to the man, the other straightening up and turning to look at him. The sentry and the man talked for a few moments. Then the man, still with his hands on his head, walked to the toilet block and disappeared inside. It was only at the last second, as the light above the lavatory door shone on his face, that I recognized him. It was Mr. Coles, my Year 4 teacher at the Wirrawee Primary. So at last we knew. A coldness crept through me. I felt the goosebumps prickle on my skin. This was the new reality of our lives. I got the shakes a bit, but there was no time for that. We had to go. We slid backwards through the grass and began to retrace our tracks from tree to tree. I remembered from a couple of years ago a big controversy when the council had wanted to cut these trees down to make a bigger car park. There'd been such an outcry that they had to give up the idea. I grinned to myself in the darkness, but without humour. Thank God the good guys had won. But no one could ever have imagined how useful those trees were going to be to us. I got to the last tree and patted its trunk gently. I felt a great affection for it. Corrie was right behind me. Then Kevin snuck in. "Nearly home free," I said, and set off again. I should have touched wood once more before I did. The moment I showed my nose, a clatter of gunfire started up behind me. Bullets zinged past, chopping huge chunks of wood out of the tree to my left. I heard a gasp from Corrie and a cry from Kevin. It was though I left the ground with sheer fear. For a moment I lost contact with the earth. It was a strange feeling, like I had ceased to be. Then I was diving at the corner of the road, rolling through the grass and wriggling like an earwig into cover. At once I turned to yell to Kevin and Corrie, but as I did they landed on top of me, knocking the wind out of me. "Go like stink," Kevin said, pulling me up. "They're coming!" Somehow, with no air in my lungs, I started to run. For 100 meters, the only sounds I could hear were the rasping of my own lungs and the soft thuds of my feet on the roadway. Although we'd agreed, so logically, to split up if we were chased, I knew now I wasn't going to do that. At that moment, only a bullet could have separated me from those two people. Suddenly, they'd become my family. Kevin was looking back all the time. "Let's get off the road," he gasped, just as I was starting to get some wind back. We turned into someone's driveway. As we did, I heard a shout. A burst of bullets chopped through the branches with tremendous force, like a sudden short gale. I realized that it was Mrs. Alexander's driveway we were sprinting along. "I know this place," I said to the others. "Follow me." It was not that I had any plan. I just didn't want to follow someone through the darkness if they didn't know where they were going. I was still operating on sheer panic. I led them across the tennis court, trying desperately to think. It wasn't enough just to run. These people were armed. They would be fast. They could summon help easily. The only thing we had going for us was that they couldn't be sure if we were armed or not. They might even think we were leading them into an ambush. I hoped they'd think that. I wish we were leading them into an ambush. We got round to the back of the house, where it was darker. It was only then that I realized that while thinking about ambushes, I'd actually led Kevin and Corrie into a trap. There was no back fence or back gate, just a row of old buildings. Last century there'd been the servants' quarters and a kitchen and a laundry. Now they were used as garages, gardening sheds, storerooms. I stopped the other two. I was horrified by how utterly terror-stricken they looked. Horrified because I knew I must look the same way. Their teeth and eyes gleamed at me, and their uncontrolled panting seemed to fill the night like a demonic wind. My mind was falling apart. All I could think of was how my arrogance in taking the lead, in being so sure I knew my way, might cost us our lives. I wasn't yet sure if the others realized how ignorant I'd been. I forced myself to speak through rattling teeth. I wasn't even sure what I was going to say, and my fury at myself seemed to come out as anger directed at them. I'm not very proud of how I was that night. Shut up and listen," I said. "For Christ's sake, we've got a couple of minutes. This is a big garden. They won't go rushing around in it, in the darkness. They'll be a bit unsure of us." "I've hurt my leg," Corrie moaned. "What, you didn't get shot?" "No, I ran into something just back there." "It's a ride-on mower," Kevin said. "I nearly hit it too." A volley of gunfire interrupted us. It was frighteningly loud. We could see the flashes of fire from the guns. As we watched, trembling, we began to recognize their tactics. They were keeping together, moving through the garden, firing into anything that could have concealed a person. A bush, a barbecue pit, a compost heap. They'd probably seen enough of us to have an idea that we were empty-handed, but they were still moving cautiously. I was struggling to get some air, to breathe. At last I was starting to think, but my brain was operating like my lungs, in great, gasping bursts. "Yes, petrol! We can roll it! No, that'd give him time. But if it sat there, matches, and a chisel or something." "Ellie, what the hell are you on about?" "Find some matches or a cigarette lighter, and a chisel, and a hammer. Quick! Very quick! Try these sheds." We spread out, rushing to the dark buildings, Corrie limping. I found myself in a garage. I felt around with my hands, locating the smooth, cold lines of a car, then quickly going to its passenger door. The door was unlocked. Like most of us who lived around Wirrawee, Mrs. Alexander didn't bother to lock her cars. Everyone trusted people. That was one thing that was going to change forever. When the door opened, the interior light, to my horror, came on. I found the switch and turned it off, and then stood there trembling, waiting for the bullets to come tearing through the walls of the building. Nothing happened. I opened the glove box, which had its own light, but it was small, and anyway I needed it. And there it was, a blessed box of matches. Thank God Mrs. Alexander was a chain smoker. I grabbed the matches, slammed the glove box shut, and ran from the garage, forgetting in my excitement that the soldiers could be out there. But they weren't, just Kevin. "Did you get them?" "I got the hammer and chisel." "Oh, Kevin, I love you." "I heard that," came Corrie's whisper from the darkness. "Take me to the ride-on," I said. Before, 2 people had found it when they didn't want to. Now, when the 3 of us wanted to find it, none of us could. 2 agonizing minutes passed. I felt my skin go colder and colder. It was like icy insects were crawling over it. At last I thought, this is hopeless. We'll have to give up. But stubbornly, like an idiot, I kept looking. Then another whisper from Corrie. "Over here!" Kevin and I converged on it at the same time. Just as we did, I saw a torch flash for a moment, somewhere near the front veranda. "They're coming!" I said. "Quick! Help me push it! But quietly!" We got it on one side of the driveway near the brick wall of Mrs. Alexander's studio. "What are the hammer and chisel for?" Kevin whispered urgently. "To make a hole in the petrol tank," I said. "But now I think it'll make too much noise doing it." "What do you need a hole?" he asked. "Why not just unscrew the lid?" I just kept right on feeling stupid. Later I realized I was even more stupid again because a hammer and chisel would have caused a spark that would have blown us all up. Kevin had worked out what I wanted, and he unscrewed the cap. "We'll all need to be behind the wall," I whispered, "and we'll need a trail of petrol to it." He nodded and pulled off his T-shirt, pushing it into the tank to soak it. Then he sat the cap back on the tank and used his shirt to lay the trail of liquid to the wall. We only had seconds left. We could hear the crunch of gravel under soft, menacing feet, and an occasional muttered comment. I heard one male voice and one female. The torch flashed again, right at the corner of the drive. Kevin's voice breathed in my ear. "We need to make sure they're all together." I nodded. I just realized the same problem. I could see 2 dark figures, but I assumed we were being hunted by the 3 patrolling sentries we'd seen before. Kevin confirmed it, breathing in my ear again. "I saw 3 of them in the road." I nodded again, then took a deep breath and let out a short, weak moan of pain. The effect on the 2 soldiers was dramatic. They turned towards us like they had antennae. I gave a little gasp and a sob. One of the soldiers, the male, called out, urgently in a language I didn't recognize, and a moment later the 3rd soldier came through the line of trees and joined the first 2. They talked for a moment, gesturing in our direction. They must have known by then that we weren't armed. We'd surely have let off a few shots by now if we had been. They spread out a little, though, and came walking slowly towards us. I waited and waited till they were about 3 meters from the mower. The small, squat, dark shape sat there, as if demanding that they notice it. For the first time I saw their faces. Then I struck the match. It didn't light. My hand, which had been very steady till then, got the shakes. I thought, we're about to die just because I couldn't light a match? It seemed unfair, almost ridiculous. I tried again, but was shaking too much. The soldiers were almost past the mower. Kevin grabbed my wrist. "Do it!" he mouthed fiercely in my ear. The soldiers seemed to have heard Kevin from the way their eager faces turned in our direction again. I struck the match for the 3rd time, almost sure there wouldn't be enough sulphur left to ignite it. But it lit, making a harsh little noise, and I threw it to the ground. I threw it too fast. I don't know how it didn't go out. It should have, and it almost did. For a moment it died to a small dot of light, and again I thought, we're dead, and it's all my fault. Then the petrol caught, with a quick whoosh. The flames ran along the line of petrol in fits and starts, like a stuttering snake, but very fast. The soldiers saw it, of course. They turned, looked, seemed to flinch. But in their surprise they were too slow to move, just as I would have been. One lifted an arm as if to point. Another leaned backwards, almost in slow motion. That's the last image I have of them, because then Kevin pulled me back, behind the brick wall, and an instant later the mower became an exploding bomb. The night seemed to erupt. The wall swayed and shook, then settled again. A small orange fireball ripped up into the darkness, with little tracer bullets of fire shooting away from it. The noise was shrill and loud and frightening. It hurt my ears. I could see bits of shrapnel hurtling into the trees, and I heard and felt a number of bits thud into the wall behind which we were hiding. Then Kevin was tugging at me, saying, "Run! Run!" At the same time, the screams began from the other side of the wall. We ran through the fruit trees and down the slope at an angle, past the chook shed, reaching Mrs. Alexander's front fence at the corner where it met the next property. The screams behind us were ripping the night apart. I hoped that the faster and further we ran, the quicker the screams would fade, but that didn't seem to be happening. I didn't know if I was hearing them only with my ears or in my mind as well. "There's just time," Corey panted from behind me. It took me a minute to realize what she meant. Time to meet the others. "We can go straight there," Kevin called. "How's your leg, Corey?" I asked, trying unsuccessfully to return to the normal world. "Okay," she answered. We saw headlights coming and ducked into a garden as a truck went past at high speed. It was a tray truck from the Wirrawee Hardware, but with soldiers in the back instead of garden tools. Only 2 soldiers, though. We ran on, reaching Warrigal Street, then racing up the Mathers steep drive, taking no precautions at all. We were struggling for breath now. My legs felt old and slow. They were really hurting. I stopped and waited for Corey. Then we walked on together, holding hands. We couldn't do any more, go any faster, or fight anyone else. Homer and Fee were there, surrounded by bikes, a full set of 7 now. Our dinking days were over, but ironically, just when we had enough bikes, there were only 5 of us to ride them. There was no sign of Lee and Robin. It was 3:35, and from the hill we could see other vehicles leaving the showground, all heading for Racecourse Road. One of them was the Wirrawee ambulance. We couldn't wait any longer. With only a few tired mumble words between us, mainly to find out that Fee's house too had been empty, we mounted the cold bikes and pedalled down the hill.